Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever it may be in your part of the world, and welcome to a very special episode of Lorebeards.
Yeah! This is definitely one of those ones that was kind of like, I don't mean it in a bad way, but it was inevitable of like, eventually we're going to have to talk about this subject because it's too popular not to. Even though it is a big one. It is a big one.
Yeah, let's see exactly where we go with this one. I'll give you all a word of warning. I am dozed up with a cold, so if I get a little bit snorty and coffee in the corner, I do apologize. I'm just old and bent, that's all. I'm a little bit like Gotrek near the end of at least the old world saga. I'm just feeling my age a bit. Unlike Felix. He kind of got off light.
Felix is feeling... Felix was doing so good until he suddenly wasn't.
Yeah, totally. So, number one, I trust you can all hear us since nobody out there is saying, we can't hear you, which is absolutely marvelous. Before we go, I am going to say at the beginning for a change, before we actually get going, that if you haven't already pre-ordered Dark Deeds, you should do so. If you don't know what Dark Deeds is by now, seriously, where have you been? I've been discussing it pretty much every single freaking week. Without fail, but do please go and pre-order Dark Deeds. The link for that is, if you're in YouTube, down in the video description right now. And much like all of our previous weeks, we obviously are going to have a bunch of super chats that come in as we go. We're going to be taking those in batches as we progress our way through the saga of Gotrek and Felix as they lead towards the end times and the great horror, in more ways than one, that presents.
It's not that the world blew up that was bad, Gotrek says. It was the writing.
As he thumbs his axe.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, so this should be a very good time. Gotrek and Felix, of course, for those that, if you're watching this and I'm somehow unaware, is the longest running series in Warhammer Fantasy, like bar none. It is so much longer than any of its contemporaries. And actually has quite a history that leads back to the very, very beginning. In many ways, it's kind of one of the longest running series in just Warhammer. I think next to only like the Horus Heresy, which just got
longer. Longer.
Yeah, which just got more investment. But Gotrek is certainly older. But so it has a lot of really, really special things to it, and it's also probably, at least for me, whenever someone's getting into Warhammer for the very, very first time, is usually my first recommendation if they don't know where to start. Like if they're like, I don't really have like a particular attachment to any race or any idea or whatever, I just want to start reading, like where should I start? Gotrek and Felix, generally speaking, is always my go-to answer because it covers so many different topics. And for the most part, is all of the stories are phenomenal. Even if there is a pretty dramatic shift once you get past a certain point and you leave behind William King and start heading into different authors. But even then, they did a fairly good job of trying to keep a lot of the themes and the ideas on point, which we'll talk about a lot today.
We certainly will.
And I guess we should probably give a spoiler warning for if you have not read Gotrek and Felix. We're going to be delving into a lot of the specifics of the series. Like not so much like we're not going to be necessarily doing like a play-by-play of it, but talking more about the themes and a lot of the major story beats. But of course, a lot of the things that end up being reveals very, very late in the series. So, you know, spoiler warning.
Let me reiterate that the Gotrek and Felix novels, in many respects, spearhead many of the things that become Warhammer over the course of time. And they actually change the Warhammer world with many of the stories that they tell. And that's right from the very beginning, right to almost the very end, where Gotrek and Felix are also used as key characters in the end times. So be aware that if you haven't read them and you're thinking of reading them, that we are going to not just spoil a few things, we're going to delve deep into a couple of those spoilers. That said, though, much as Sotek has said here, we're not going to be going blow by blow here. That not only because there are far too many tales for us to dive in one by one, we could probably do a stream per book with ease. And I I do really mean with ease, because all of them have got so many fun, interesting character beats, story beats, and twists on the Warhammer world that you might not expect if you are, say, for example, a modern player, or if you're an older player who hasn't kept up with the 6th, 7th, and 8th editions of the battle game, and you're just interested as to where it goes. Gotrek and Felix kind of weave their way through all of it, and they change over time as well because of this, particularly as different authors start picking it up, and it's far easier for Black Library to just say, yeah, you're not doing that anymore because the Warhammer world's this now, and they don't need to say that to say Bill King, who created it in the first place. So Bill goes, yeah.
What? All right, what?
Okay. What? Excuse me, Mr. Editor. I think it should be this way instead. So be aware there are going to be spoilers, but we have no real intent here of actually going in and spoiling the primary plot points of the books. We're much more interested in talking about who are Gotrek and Felix, how did they become who they are, what sort of impact have they made upon the world, and why have people both massively overinflated them and in many respects massively underinflated them in terms of their importance to the Warhammer world in general.
Yeah, so I would say, like, if you're someone that's just incredibly sensitive to spoilers, this could be one of those streams where you might want to like read the books and then come back. But unless you're just like, I don't want to know anything, which, like, I'm not one of those people. We're not, like I said, we're not going to touch a lot of the specifics. So for the most part, you're still going to be extremely surprised and, enjoy yourself reading through all of it and the way things happen, especially because you may hear us talk about certain ideas and be like, oh, this will show up in the first 3 books. When in reality, a lot of things we're going to talk about won't be actually revealed until like book 12 or book 13 or something. So, it's a spoilers, but take it with kind of some grains of salt type spoilers.
Yeah, totally. So I think before we go, we've got a bunch of super chats in because everyone's super excited, much like we are, about Gotrek and Felix. So we'll dive into those, work our way through those, and then we'll, in turn, dive deep into the good old chronicles of Gotrek and Felix.
Yep. So Viper Wolf says, "Good day, Loremasters. I'm at a military drill, but I have many questions. Firstly, do you hate almost as much as elves, trees?" What? Do you hate almost as much elves?
What do you hate? Oh, yeah, quite.
Oh, what do you hate?
Which ones do you hate? Yeah, I think is what he's trying to say. More than all those things. The 336 other non-dwarfish things. Quite. It's fair to say that Gotrek does, through the course of the books, manage to find many things to complain about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He is.
Oh, yeah.
Gotrek is. We'll get into it, but yeah, he's cantankerous is such an appropriate term for him.
It absolutely is.
What do I hate in Warhammer? Do I hate anything as much as Gotrek does? I don't think I do, to be totally frank with you.
Nah. One of the great joys of being lore masters, as we somewhat daftly refer to ourselves sometimes, is that you end up loving all of it. You can't help yourself. Even the stuff that other people are like, I hate this bit. You find reasons to try and justify it, to try and make it work, and you start liking the stuff that previously you may have gone, you know what, I don't like this bit at all. And it's fair to say that if you've watched any of our previous streams, you've probably heard me bitch a lot about various aspects of Warhammer, and the same will be the case for Sotek over on the other side. But having said that, though, the more you talk about it, the more you read it, the more you work your way through it, you start going, actually, no, there's some bloody amazing stories in here, even in the broken parts. So I think my answer to all of that would be, yeah, nothing really. I kind of love it all in its own little sweet way.
Yeah, except Kabanda. Kabanda can die in a fire. There we go. I found one. a 40K character just showing up in fantasy. There we go. I got it.
Hey, fantasy characters have been doing it at 40K for ages. It seems only fair that they get a little bit of return.
It's not about what's fair. It's about what's right. Hammond says you should get Limey on here. I don't know what that refers to. What is a Limey?
Lemmy. If it's who I think it is, he'll be swearing a lot. Yes, and that would be fun.
There you go. Tamarkand must rise. Yeah.
Not far away.
Not far away, I don't think. Not far away, I don't think. Ryan Harden, shout out to Jonathan Keeble, the voice of Gotrek and Felix. Yes, for all of the audiobooks, he does a lot of works for those books. I imagine he's done so much talking about Gotrek and Felix.
Yeah, quite.
All right. CP4N, in honor of WrestleMania weekend, could Gotrek and Felix beat our tribal chief Roman Reigns and the final boss, The Rock, in a Bloodline Rules tag team match on the grandest stage of them all? I think Felix would probably have a really interesting perspective and hard time with WrestleMania. Gotrek would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Just an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. Easy.
They would have to say, Gotrek, please stop hurting the wrestlers. It's supposed to be a performance, please. What if Krimlo was their manager for the match? Yeah, even Krimlo couldn't bunk it up. I don't think.
What about Krem Gelto?
Yeah, oh, well, that would be different. What if Gelt was the announcer and sportscaster? My brain is still recovering along with my body from extreme strenuous activity yesterday, so I apologize. Honestly, I don't think Gelt would make a horrible announcer, especially if they go with these like metallic vocal cords that they gave him in Total War. He would be delightful to listen to because he would have such a unique timbre.
For you, perhaps.
Okay, just going straight for the throat on this one. What is Andy's favorite Gotrek story?
Geheimnisnacht, because it was the first I read, and as often is the case, the thing that sinks you into a particular, let's say, anthology of books in this case, is the one that tends to grip you and keep you. And for me, it was the one that very much started me off. So because of that, that particular story stands out for me.
Well, there you go. The Game Doctor, all of the Gotrek. I hope Gotrek interacts with the new gods in Age of Sigmar in his series. Him talking to Teclis would be hilarious. Yeah, honestly, one thing that I think at least David Geimer has gotten really, really good at with his Gotrek series is he walks a very nice fine line between Gotrek interacting with the new and Gotrek interacting with the old, and keeping him very well on point, which has been really, really nice. There is actually a fun conversation between him and Alariel if you read Blood of the Old World. So that is a good kind of incentive to check that book out if you want.
Taika's saying that I'm quiet. Is that the case to everyone else out there?
I mean, you sound normal.
Check there.
Yeah, you sound normal to me, but okay, I also only hear half of it. Inquisitor Thomas, do you think with the old world we could get more Gotrek and Felix stories? Of course, not set in the period, but during the time skip after Giant Slayer, like a novel about Gotrek and Felix and Cathay. It would depend on how I think it would depend on what constraints GW puts on Black Library.
Now, would they like to do one for money alone? I think Black Library most certainly would be interested in doing so, but the timeline doesn't really match for this, so it almost certainly would be outside of their current core product range. That being the case, it would not surprise me if it was nixed and they completely kept that character, and who knows, Felix too, for Age of Sigmar, to ensure that there's not any crossover there. So it would not surprise me if, sadly, the answer here is a very clean no.
Yeah, I would agree. At least until they can settle down silly garbage between those two studios. What happened to the building when the building fell on Felix? He Gotrek'd. Oh, like
I don't get that one.
Like he croaked, but he Gotrek'd.
Okay, sure.
Like it's a stretch. I can see it. It's a stretch. Greg, Felix and Gotrek are lit. That's not how it goes. I've just finished Skaven Slayer for the third time. Love how the Skaven are written. For me, Felix and Gotrek are the true chronicles of Warhammer. Yeah,
that is very much the case for many people, particularly because unlike many of the older books, Gotrek and Felix received a fair bit of, let's say, uplift over the course of its various editions and the later books, in that, as Warhammer changed, so did they. So they provide an interesting metric for what is Warhammer in a way that other books don't, where they're almost encapsulated in time at whenever it was they were written. Felix and Gotrek span the whole thing and have been rewritten in a few places just to make sure that they no longer cause issues. But yeah, I agree. They pretty much are the Warhammer series.
Yep, I agree. 100%. Misguided Worm, thank you for the very generous super chat. We appreciate that so much.
Thank you so
much. Question from the previous Grombrindle stream. Grombrindle stated humans could never be good oath keepers because of their undetermined afterlife. Could Cathayans be effective oath keepers given their afterlife is fairly well figured out? It is certainly possible. Cathayans, especially because they have more of an ancestor realm, and they have almost a system of ancestor worship. There's actually a lot between how Cathayans are depicted, where there's probably much they would agree with when it comes to dwarfs, and they would probably have a lot of, especially with dragons ruling over them. I imagine that having a word that you give and following through with it is very important to their society, because you have these immortal rulers and you also have an ancestor realm where your ancestors are waiting for you, and honor seems to be very, very important to the Cathayans. So I imagine there is a lot there that's interesting that could be explored that I don't think the writers have really thought about.
And I agree, because Cathay came afterwards, obviously. So the writing for Grombrindle, in that particular piece of writing at least, came before, significantly before, in fact. Having said that, though, if we're just talking about your typical Cathayan and not dragon-blooded weirdos, then we are dealing with many of the same core issues on one side of the globe as we have on the other with humanity, and that's that they're short-lived, they make rash decisions, they live in the moment in a way that, say, for example, the dwarves absolutely don't. It's not just what goes on in the afterlife and the lack of awareness of what sits there. It's the very nature of humanity that Grombrindle doesn't pick up. And the fact that humans just are a bit rubbish. They are quite literally named Umgi for a reason. They are not very well built. And that being the case, I think regardless of where they come in the world, he's pretty much going to stick to the same core stereotypes. So even if Cathayans have perhaps got cultural reasons for why what he believes may not apply, I think the actual reality of it would be that Grombrindle wouldn't give a flying yeah.
Yeah, you have to remember, if ultimately you only are going to live for, like, if you're lucky, 60 to 80 years, you're not going to be able to necessarily fulfill all the promises you made in your teens or your 20s. And to Grombrindle, that would be a problem. It's like, you made the promise, so you should fulfill it. And the human's like, I'm old. I literally just can't anymore. Or I have these other obligations and stuff. Like, I have a family now, and all these situations have changed. And the dwarf would be like, see, that's what I was talking about. Mendatis, have an idea for how a militant Gazul cult may work, but think require more verbiage here. Ask in Pigeon, or is Discord channel for a community critique?
Stop it in Discord.
Yeah,
why
stop
not?
it in Discord.
If you pop it into Discord, you're almost certainly going to get a bunch of folks jumping in and saying, have you considered this, or how about this instead? It's always worth doing that, because more heads often will provide you with a slightly bigger and broader answer, and I'm quite interested myself just to see what you do with Gazul.
Yep. So, Hoplite 8. When will Warhammer expand into other story genres like romance? We all want that tale of forbidden romance between Balthazar, Gelt, and Krimlo. See, you had a interesting question and then you ruined it.
But you know, Hoplite 8, I actually think you've got a fair point there, because if you go back to the original Warhammer books, and I'm going to make a comment about their success a little bit afterwards, but if we go back to the original ones, and the ones that were published by Box Tree Books, or the ones that were done by Warhammer Books, they tended to skim around different genres a little bit more and had less of a formulaic approach to how they would resolve their novels. But it's also fair to say that they did not sell all that well in comparison to what would come later when Mark Gascoigne created Black Library, and when Black Library was put in place, certain formulas followed after that, and those formulas turned into the books that we know and love today, and they started selling like hotcakes. In some respects, they started selling so well that they kind of didn't know what to do with everything that they'd suddenly received, and Black Library became far more important than it may otherwise have been, or indeed was ever expected to be, because it was making money hand over fist, which eventually turned into, as we all know, the Horus Heresy and that great money-making machine that happened there. So, loosely speaking, it's already happened and it didn't go very well. Not that it went terribly. Warhammer is much smaller then anyway, but it's sort of happened, but now they have a formula, so I think the chance of them branching out in any realistic way beyond an individual story, perhaps giving us a bit more slice of life or a bit more concentration on non-standard subjects, we'll get that, and we'll constantly get that, but it's going to end in a big battle, because in the end, it is Warhammer. And that war is always going to come to the fore. So regardless of how amusing the point was, the actual underlying question is super interesting. But I think sadly, as it currently stands, Warhammer hasn't yet reached a point where it can do a Marvel. And by that I mean where it can tell multiple different styles of stories that are all superhero stories, or in this case, all Warhammer stories. So we can have a spy drama, or we can have ourselves a classic comedy, or we can have something else. Warhammer still isn't really quite there yet, but it has all of the tools to be there, and I think would be a better, fuller, richer world if it was.
Yeah, I mean, they only just got around to basically having a certain time of year now where they release like explicitly horror novels, and that's like a novel idea for Black Library that they only adopted like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's kind of starting to happen, but it's very slow.
And it's also fair to say as well that it's sort of happening in that it turns into a big fight in the end as well.
Well, yeah, I think even if they did a romance novel, there'd be a big fight in the end of it.
Yeah, so the core concepts of what they're doing haven't really changed. But then again, Marvel's largely the same, isn't it? Their heroes have a big fight, and it's often a sky beam. So don't be surprised if it never really happens. But equally, there is that gentle development in place. And yeah, I can't believe I mixed that.
Gotrek with got wrecked.
Got wrecked, yeah.
Okay.
I feel really foolish, but hey, I'm ill today.
Yeah, we're slow today.
I'm ill. I'm gonna miss that stuff. Oh.
If Gotrek got teleported into our world, would he be an ice road trucker, an oil rig worker, or a New York high-rise altitude crane operator?
I thought we'd already determined that he was going to be in the WWE.
Yeah. I feel like we've already answered this question.
Yeah.
He'd be a miner down in the mines, bitching about everything and about how change comes to the world and everything was better in the old days.
Miner strike time.
Yep. Phil 5991 missed your stream yesterday, Andy. I wanted to know if the gods were self-aware of their nature, that they reflections of emotions and thoughts.
Okay, so I did cover that yesterday. Go take a check. But loosely speaking, your last sentence that they're just a reflection of emotions and thoughts is not accurate. That's only accurate for certain ones of them and certain manifestations. This isn't 40k. Warhammer has developed significantly beyond that rather constrained model, in the same way that greenskins have almost certainly developed far beyond the spore model that 40k offers, because we have so many different types of greenskins in the Warhammer world. It's a far larger development of just the gods are nothing more than collections of emotions in the warp, so to speak. They are much more than that, and there is living denizens that lie over on the aether side. Much of these would be referred to as gods by certain real-world species, so it's far more complicated than that alone.
Yep, and then we've got Greg. If you had a live-action Gotrek and Felix series, which actors would you see in the main roles? Also, where Stormcast Felix? You assume you're gonna get a Stormcast Felix. I think that Felix, I honestly think Felix will return at some point, but they're really saving that as like for something really important, or something where they're like, oh, sales are dropping. Look, it's Felix. But I don't think he'll be a Stormcast, actually. I think he'll be something else. But as far as live action, who would I? Oh God, I don't.
That's really hard, because ultimately, if we're talking about a dwarf, you'd really be looking for, I mean, live actions.
It's hard
because
it's super hard.
Warhammer dwarfs don't look like, say, Lord of the Ring dwarfs. They look proper and human. They don't have the same proportions. They are completely different. I mean, if you take a look at pretty much any piece of art, Gotrek's hand's the same size as Felix's head, pretty much consistently.
I'm gonna be honest. I really don't want a live action Warhammer Fantasy. I would rather just have animated because it could be so much more true. Like, I know they're gonna do it eventually. There's gonna be live action Warhammer. Like, it feels unavoidable just because it's so much cheaper than animated. Interestingly, but like I guess you could use CGI or something to try and make them.
So for Felix, you're really looking for someone tall, lean. He's got a fencer's body. He's classically trained in fencing, and obviously he's gone
ruggedly handsome.
He's gone through literally everything. He's almost got what I imagine he's almost got a swimmer's body. If you're looking for typical body types, you know, he's going to have broad shoulders going down to a slim waist, very muscled. So there's bound to be a bunch of actors who sort of fit that. We're talking far thinner, far leaner, rather than say someone like Henry Cavill. So you're looking for someone who's leaner and more fencerly like. I'm going to have a think in this one because I have, Greg, never actually really had a good think about it.
I don't know any actors' real names. I only know the characters they play because that's just something that had stuck in my brain.
There'll be someone. I just haven't figured it out yet. There'll be someone.
Yeah. Hit us up on that again. Sorry, I'm gonna rephrase that. Hit Andy with that later. Not me. Laughing God, so excited for this stream. Thank you both for it. Well, hey, we're happy to do it. Thanks for being here, guys.
Very happy.
Thank you both, painting and listening to Warhammer. Awesome, Michael. Hope it's
going well with the painting.
Yep. Don't spill your paints. Don't tip over your what's that wash everybody always knocks over? Nuln oil. Careful around the Nuln oil.
It goes everywhere. Yeah.
Hammond, Eddie Hall or Brian Shaw for Gotrek. Felix is Henry Cavill could not. I don't think he makes
Henry Cavill. I don't think
he's too big.
He's too chunky. He's too much of a chunky boy. And he's also too, for me, when it comes to fantasy, associated with both Superman, even though that's not fantasy, and obviously The Witcher. And whilst he could blonde wig it if you wished, I just can't see it. It just doesn't feel like, for at least me, Felix. It feels like he'd make a great Karl Franz.
Yeah, he'd be perfect for Karl Franz.
Perfect Karl Franz in him. But I would definitely not say Felix. You're looking for someone leaner, taller, arguably, although he's very tall, but definitely leaner. Bill Skarsgård.
Bill Skarsgård. Yeah.
Bill Skarsgård isn't really laughs in Nuln oil. Yeah, my tables are well known for their oil spills. Never good.
I've lost a piece of carpet to that once. Total Warrior, what characters could defeat Gotrek in a one-on-one? We'll kind of talk about this, but pseudo canonically, very few.
Yeah, very few. I'll both say very few and all of them. Because one of the great joys of Gotrek is he fucks up. He does things wrong. He charges
Felix.
in when he shouldn't. Yeah, absolutely.
Felix.
So he is far from indestructible while simultaneously he's indestructible. So I think that's worth being relatively clear about. It's very easy to over-egg the Gotrek pudding, but he's lucky. He's got his doom, if you wish to put it that way. He's not just so enormously capably skilled that he will be able to take everything on. There are certain things that absolutely would just splat him easily, but they don't. And that's the big joy of him, because obviously he's got plot armor, but the plot armor aside, he does make mistakes, which is half the fun of him.
Yep. Okay, last two, and then we're gonna move on with the video because we've been doing super chats for 30 minutes. Thank you for the support, though. We really appreciate it. And
absolutely.
We'll catch up on the rest of them later. Nivel, Henry would make a good Max Schreiber IMO. Henry Cavill as Max Schreiber, the wizard? Wizards, unless it's like a very particular metal wizard or a bright wizard, they should probably not be that big.
Metal wizard.
Yeah, really. We'll agree to disagree on that one. I'm decided. If we're talking WWE, Elton Prince could do Felix if he ain't Sigvald already.
Sure, I'm not sure who Elton Prince is because I've not kept up with WWE, although I did watch a fair bit of it when I was a kid because I was a kid. All right, are we getting ready to go? Because I think we should start diving in, unless we've got anything else that we missed.
We had a bit from Mornington Crescent which said...
let's not miss that.
Yeah, I don't know where it is on here, but I have it pulled up on my other screen, which is, why is it Gotrek and Felix and not Felix and Gotrek? Alphabetically largest kill, and in terms of height, Felix wins. There you go. You found it. I don't know why. Gotrek is kind of... Felix is more like the character describing what's going on, whereas Gotrek kind of feels like the main character in a sense.
Yeah, Felix is our route through to Gotrek.
Yeah, whereas Gotrek feels like what the story actually revolves around.
Yeah, absolutely does. Although over the course of time, Felix gets a lot, and I do mean a lot to do, an awful lot to do. Alrighty. I think it's time for us to begin. So I'm going to, before I turn into a cough meister and start spluttering in the corner, I'm going to take you yet again back in time. I'm going to take you back before Black Library existed, before Games Workshop even had their own imprint for doing novels, all the way back to when they were first thinking about doing stories and publishing them. Back in the days when Brian Ansell was still running things back at Games Workshop Studios, so we're now in the 80s. And Bill King was an author who had not got many things published at this point. And he was going to pen out one of the most famous stories that would ever be penned for Warhammer. But at this point, nobody knew it. Nobody was aware that Geheimnisnacht was not only going to become such an influential story that Geheimnisnacht would be enshrined in Warhammer lore and would never vanish, and would be used and repurposed by later books to mean so many different things just because they kept on harking back to only the novel, and they didn't realize that the novel was based on Geheimnisnacht as it had already been presented in the role-playing game. Because those were the days when we come later where they forget about much of their lore. But in these early days, they have yet to do so. It's Warhammer 3rd edition time. So we are late 90s. It is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition time. And Warhammer for the first time is becoming real. It's not just a collection of random models that have been pulled together from various ranges, mostly Citadel, but not entirely, to play games of fantasy battles. It's not just that. It's become its own world. They've got their own world map, and they've got their first core setting, and that's the Empire. And with the Empire, they're beginning to tell their first stories. And one of these first stories is Geheimnisnacht, where Felix and Gotrek are presented for the first time. As I recall, Bill was asked why write a story about a Slayer? Because, hey, don't they have a death wish? And the answer to that was absolutely. What's not freaking cool about a punk dwarf with a giant axe with a death wish? And indeed, when he wrote this story first time round, Gotrek was supposed to die. If you read it, you can see the point where he was going to die. And when it was first written, he died. But Bill was looking over his story and he went, you know what? There could be something in this. I quite like this story. I think I can possibly turn this into my own anthology. And he started thinking about overall the big fantasy books that he read when he was a kid and the anthologies that came out from them. And he was like, you know what? I think these could be my anthology characters if this works. So Gotrek didn't die. And you could argue that this is the doom of Gotrek manifesting for the first time. Somehow he survives something he absolutely should not have survived. He should have died that day. Indeed, when it was first written, he did. So our first short stories pop up. Ignorant Armies comes out, which is a book by Box Tree Books. As I recall, this is running back in time. I remember when I got my first copy. I think it had a green cover. It's a lot. I've got it somewhere. In fact, it's in storage just now, so I can't bring it over. And it was a story. It was super popular, largely because Troll Slayers at this point were super popular, largely because of the role-playing game. Because everybody could play for the first time their punk dwarfs, and it was sitting front and center on the first edition of the role-playing game cover. Indeed, many said, is that Gotrek and Felix on the cover? It wasn't, but it could have been. It absolutely could have been Felix and Gotrek. It wasn't, but it absolutely could have been. So more of these stories were commissioned. Not that many at this point. There's just a few smattering around, and Bill moved over into the studio where he was writing stories for the new army books that were getting created for the new edition of Warhammer. That is the 4th edition, the big box set with elves and goblins, and we've discussed that particular box set and what it means previously when we were doing the Grom the Paunch stream. Do go check that one out, because it's now that time. And Gotrek and Felix popped up again and again a couple of times in stories that they were building for their army books. And one huge thing happens at this point. This is long before the novels are a thing. Gotrek and Felix become part of Warhammer. Now, this might make you go, so what? There's lots of things that got put into Warhammer. I'll explain why this was immense. So at this point in Warhammer, there was a clear divide between what was happening with the Warhammer books and what was happening in the studio. A very clear divide. The studio made the game. The books were completely separate to that. They were doing their own thing. But not anymore, because for the first time, a character that people had been reading about in the books was officially entered into the game with Gotrek and Felix at the back of the Dwarf Army list. They were just sitting there, Gotrek and Felix. Mark Gibbons, my best pal, Mark, who also, by the way, did all the art for this. I can't believe I got a plug-in. Go buy Dark Deeds. That was accidental completely. Kind of just arrived. So Mark Gibbons did a beautiful picture of Gotrek and Felix, one of the very first ones. People were going all Google-eyed at that, because for the first time, Gotrek was pictured and Felix beside him. It's a black and white image with Gotrek literally snarling out, and Felix had his stripy pants and his cloak. This would define them forever. They would pretty much never change from this point. This is what, 1993 off the top of my head, somewhere around there. This is long before the books have come into place, again, just to get it in place. But they were now part of the battle game and part of the novels, and they opened a door. And it was a door that very few other characters would walk through. And that door was Black Library to come, having characters move into Warhammer. It was almost always the other way around. Almost always stuff the studio created, then had some stories spun around it, or Black Library just did its own thing. Things like Malice Darkblade would never have happened if not for Gotrek and Felix basically cracking down that door with a gigantic axe and a magical rune sword. So, we skip ahead a little bit because, time passes. We're now heading towards...
Unfortunately, yes, it does.
Yeah, it is. We're now heading towards Black Library time, 1997. Mark Gascoigne creates Black Library, and we sort of discussed it a little bit earlier in the stream, where we were discussing the things that Black Library was doing. But one of the things that they did was they made Inferno magazine. And there was already a host of small short stories, and they were added to by Bill King, who returned to Gotrek and Felix for the first time in some time and wrote some more. These stories eventually became the anthology that is now known as Trollslayer. The various stories that popped up inside the army list will get collected into another anthology much later. But Trollslayer, the very first of the books, gets collected together and Black Library releases it. And let's say it does pretty well. Not long after, a whole bunch of other short stories, well, one short story in particular, about the Skaven in Nuln gets collected together and expanded significantly and turns into Skaven Slayer, the second novel. Now things are properly moving. It looks like Bill's earlier thought, now a decade old, was beginning to slowly but surely come to fruition. He had himself the beginning of a proper anthology, and it becomes a proper anthology because he moves on to work onto Demon Slayer. Let's see if I get these right. Dragon Slayer, Beast Slayer, Vampire Slayer, Giant Slayer. Do I have it right? Oh, yes. Okay, so I'm feeling really happy.
Correct.
Okay, and during this time, we get a whole host of really cool characters that have now become grounded in anybody who's obviously read the books' psyche. Some of whom are super famous, whether it's our Malachi Malexins or whether it's our Ulrikas or whomever. And of course, our famous wizard who we've already discussed. Through the course of this, we dive deep into Felix's past, deep into Gotrek's past. We have some new tales spun, and we begin to see the formation of a new version of Warhammer through the course of these books. Because this is the Warhammer, we're now, about 6th edition, that the Black Library side tends to forget about, for example, the colleges of magic. They didn't exist when the books were first written. So they start getting wended in. There was no colleges of magic, but suddenly Max Schreiber, he was expelled by the colleges. I mean, was he? Yes. Yes, he was. That happened. Definitely happened.
Expelled and then got reaccepted after reapplying after a while.
And why was he expelled from there? Because if you looked at anything that he did, there was no way he would fit into the colleges at all.
Yeah, he was a different kind of wizard.
Indeed. Eventually, though, we reach the point where Bill has run his, let's say, run with the character, and he's done. I won't go into any reasons as to why. There's some interviews out there if you wish to go and do it, or I presume if the Loremaster of Sotek wishes to pick up on that, he can do so. But that's broadly unimportant, because eventually it reaches the point where Bill has told all the stories he wants to tell. He's gone down the Hammer horror side with good old Vampire Slayer. He's gone through a host of crazy places, including particularly the Realm of Chaos up towards the north, and Khazad Dûm. Can't go wrong with that nonsense. Super fun. Super, 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 super fun tales getting told there. But he's effectively reached the end of the tales he wants to tell. And Black Library, because Bill doesn't actually own those characters, passes it over to a new author. In this case, it's American screenwriter Nathan Long. Now, Nathan is awesome. I know Nathan really well. Nathan lives over in LA, and he currently works for NXL Software. He is the head writer for games like Wasteland 1, 2, and 2 and 3. And is currently getting all the Microsoft money to write tons of really cool role-playing game stuff. And he's just literally the best. And Nathan picked up where Bill left off. But Nathan had a different remit. Nathan had to try and make Gotrek and Felix match the current Warhammer world. Because they didn't. They just didn't.
Yeah.
And as much as I would love to say that they did not. So part of Nathan's remit was to both take these characters that are beloved and not so much reimagine them, but bring them up to date so that they actually fit into the world, and also bring them up to date in the timeline. So it was actually in the timeline that the games were being produced for, which means the original books, they are now the past. We're going to skip a good number of years. I think it's 20?
Yeah, there's a 20-year time skip.
20-year gap? Yep, 20-year gap. And then we head towards Orc Slayer. After Orc Slayer, oh God, let's see, I do not want to do him wrong. Is it Manslayer next? Elf Slayer?
Yeah.
Shaman Slayer? And Zombie Slayer, I think. Okay, now, I'm going to pull out one of those books in particular, because I told you, I know Nathan really well. This is Shaman Slayer. This is one of his books. And I was talking to Nathan throughout this period, because I was working behind the scenes over at Black Library. And right at the very beginning of this book, let's see if I can get you to see this. There's a nice little couple of words. I don't know if you can see that at the top there.
We can. Yes, we can.
To Andy Law, my native guide.
Native guide?
Look at that. So, if you're looking for a lore master, apparently that's me. So
Andy...
Yeah?
Andy's the oh God, what's her name? Who was the Native American who guided Lewis and Clark? Sacagawea.
I have gone out of focus here. That's it. There we go. I'm back in.
Yeah, there you go.
Everyone.
Andy is Warhammer Sacagawea. You heard it here first.
Yeah, indeed. So I got one of the books dedicated to me, which was super nice, because I've been helping Nathan with his understanding of where places were in the Warhammer world as the various characters are making their way down through the south of Middenland, into Reichland, over to Castle Reitgar, big siege, and everything that was occurring throughout the course of those stories. I've been helping him through various parts, and indeed, he then, when he was last over here, signed it there with a very quick, Andy, I would have been lost without you, Nathan Long. Which is super sweet. So, with Nathan, we got ourselves a bunch of extra books. Now, he was going to write more, but Games Workshop was going into yet another period of its life. They moved on from this particular set of writing past, I think he might have done another audiobook as well. I can't recall what it's called. That's
the Storm God. Gotrek and Felix Storm God. Yeah.
Yeah, Storm God. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm keeping it relatively straight. So now... It goes from Nathan Long to an anthology of authors, because they do an anthology book with a bunch of authors that come in. In particular, after that, as I recall, it's David Geimer and Josh Reynolds who write a few of the books before we start heading towards what we all know is coming. Through the course of this period, they start diving a lot into the past. Different authors take the stories of Gotrek and Felix and they discuss things that happened previously, what that means for the current characters now, and then we head in towards what inevitably is going to be, I'm pretty sure I've got these somewhere around, our end times. Can't go wrong with the old end times, the doom of Gotrek Gurnison, because quite literally his doom is about to come calling. Now, the whole doom thing was laid out in the army list all the way back in the 90s, because they were hinting at what was effectively the old Grimner Gotrek thang that was going to be coming later. And in this particular case, good old David Geimer polishes off the story of what happens at the end of time with Gotrek and Felix in the end times. And as we know, those of you who do know, regardless of how this story ends, and the story does really end.
Yeah, it does.
Really ends. It's a proper end. They're going to completely undermine that end with Age of Sigmar.
It's one of the... David Geimer, funny enough, was one of the very few authors who I think was either allowed to, or at least had the presence of mind to sort of be looking at the end times and go, oh yeah, I need to end this story. Like, I don't need to set up for a new story. I need to end this story. Like he does some very clever stuff when they brought him back to write Realm Slayer about how to continue the story. But he definitely had to do some really interesting hat tricks to make it work, because it was such a definitive end.
And it was great. So thanks, David Geimer. Awesome. And that's loosely where our story, at least the parts that we're covering in this stream, come to an end.
Because this is Gotrek and Felix stream.
Absolutely. It's Gotrek and Felix. It's not what comes next in the audio drama Realm Slayer as bum bum bum. The cat came back the very next day. Gotrek came back. You thought he was a goner. Yeah, he was right back in there. So what we have is a character that has existed since pretty much the beginning of modern Warhammer. These pair were there right at the very start of what is the 3rd/4th edition transition. They were there for the battle game, and they lasted right to the very end. These are characters that speak to what Warhammer Fantasy is. And for many people who have come to the novels, whether it was later or whether they came through with the novels, they epitomize everything that is Warhammer that's both good and bad. And I'm going to very briefly end on that for my introduction, because these characters change. There's no other way of putting it. We have the characters that Bill King originally creates that are broadly quite grounded, going through a bunch of hijinks and adventures that are high fantasy in general approach and are often very pulpy in terms of how they do their things. They are a classic anthology pair that survive against all the odds. They then get turned into something much bigger. Felix is no longer really mortal. Gotrek, well, hey, where he ends, he's definitely not.
Yeah, no.
And they move from a pair of grounded characters into something that doesn't just dial it up to 11. It was already at 11. Bill King was writing 11 for his work to support Warhammer 4th edition Warhammer, into 5th edition Warhammer, into 6th edition Warhammer. He was already writing pretty high fantasy. When Nathan came in, they continued that, both grounded and kind of high fantasy, but with extra bits added, and it just kept on piling on until we end up with a Gotrek and Felix that are very different, yet just the same, as they were right at the very beginning. And for some readers, they don't like it because they think of the original characters that they had, and they look at what they've become and they're like, this is why Warhammer is silly. Where on the other side, other readers come in and they go, they're a bit weird to begin with, but then they turn into proper Warhammer characters. Oh yeah! So you'll find that these characters represent very different things to completely different readers. But if you're willing to disengage your critical thought for just a bit, and this is something I recommend you don't do in general, and you just view it as one big long stream of books, they're freaking awesome. There's some extraordinary tales in there. They're super fun. So the end of my intro to this particular stream is, If you haven't read these books, which we intend not to spoil too heavily here, go and read them. Now, I know that sounds like an advert for good old Black Library. In some respects, it is exactly that. These are books that, if you're Warhammer fans, are worth your time. Not all of the stories are great, but all of the stories contain greatness. Not all of the stories are brilliant, but all of the stories have brilliant moments. And there's not a point throughout the course of all of the books that I would go, I was bored. They're not those sort of books.
Yeah.
They're always building towards something, and they do tell different stories. They have different tones, whether it's moving through sieges or going through high adventures in the mountains or down through the realms of chaos or down to the depths of the ocean. And fishmen! There are all manner of awesome stuff in there that, if you are a fan of Warhammer, you can't help but giggle, particularly when the Skaven return again and again, because they're freaking hilarious. The tone that the Skaven would get from the Felix and Gotrek novels established so much of what we know about them. And I'll use that as a single example for what Gotrek and Felix did for the world as a whole. Wherever the authors took them, they defined things. It was almost like they were carving reality out of chaos. Wherever they went, they created new material, and unlike almost every other Black Library creation, what they created stuck.
Yeah.
It really stuck. And it because they were popular, meaning that Warhammer, the battle game, unlike in every other instance, followed the lead of Gotrek and Felix. They, in many respects, defined Warhammer in a way that almost nothing else has, bar, and this is a controversial argument, but I'm going to say it, Total War. Total War redefined Warhammer by effectively following the core definition so hard, and then doing that so well that Games Workshop went, you're free to try out something new, and boy, did they. And in the same way, the Gotrek and Felix books were so popular that they could define things. 40k has got its own authors who've done the same thing over there, but in Warhammer, it's rare. And Gotrek and Felix are those rare examples. Look at the other major characters in the novels, say our Brunners or our Witch Hunters, or indeed, Miles Darkblade to a degree, but most of them are either already battle characters or are forgotten. They're just gone. They have made no impact in the slightest. Gotrek and Felix are the opposite. Even though the world that they create is so far from Warhammer in so many places, they nevertheless were constantly gripped back onto and have defined everything that we now know. So I will end with a go and read the books.
Yep, and it also kind of goes to show how crazy important they are. That even going into a Total War setting, they're very unique compared to every other characters in the games, where they have so much dialogue between them and so much special text that's been added to really make it clear that they are the Black Library characters, not just, the army book characters. Like Malice Darkblade, Total War really bent over backwards to include a lot of fun references to various parts of his novels, but they're very self-contained stories. Like, you don't need to know any of that for the wider universe.
Right? Elves have beards, right?
Yeah, to go back to a certain time, apparently.
The Malice Darkblade comics made some interesting choices with elven beards.
Yeah, but like Gotrek and Felix it's basically like sacred text in many ways to Warhammer. There are a couple of things that got changed later that are talked about in Gotrek and Felix, but it's almost always from the first book only, and even then it's fleetingly rare. Without further ado, I'm going to get caught up on just the last few super chats that came in, and then we're going to talk about some specific things.
Yeah.
So we've got here from Adam. Hi, Andy and Sotek. In some lore videos, I've heard that the Pantheon of the Tomb Kings all died during the Nagash's Great Ritual. Why would all the Tomb King gods die except for Assyrian? Is this interpretation correct? I'm going to say no. That is from the Nagash trilogy and the Nagash trilogy only, and that trilogy does not make any sense at all when you compare it to the rest of the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Don't just ignore it. Literally just ignore it.
I have a really good answer for that one. Bullshit! Bullshit! There we go. That's my answer to that.
Remember, he's coughing a lot today.
Yeah, I got a cough today. I apologize.
Yeah, that book drives me
as well.
Yeah, we've talked about how Black Library books you have to take with grains of salt, and you have to compare them against other books to see how well they mesh into the universe. The Nagash trilogy, which we talked about back during the Nagash episode, is basically in its own universe.
Really
That
is.
completely ignores how fantasy works. And it's just a fucking mess. Like, not to wax too lyrical on it, but it's almost disrespectful how much of a fucking mess it is, and just ignores everything else around it. To the way that it handles Cathay, fucking mess. The way it handles the vampires, fucking mess. The way it handles magic, fucking mess. The way it handles the gods, fucking mess. The way it handles the Tomb Kings, fucking mess. The way it handles pre-Tomb King Nehekaras, fucking mess. It's like, the second the Tomb King 8th edition army book came out, that was literally Games Workshop dragging that Nagash book behind a shed and shooting it in the head. It's not even remotely canon. Like, unless there's parts of it you just really like, but that's, different.
And just to compare here with Gotrek and Felix, Gotrek and Felix are literally proliferated with stuff that makes no sense if you know the greater lore. You just look at it and you go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. Or what? That doesn't sound quite right. Doesn't matter. They, by comparison to, say, the Nagash books, are a gold standard of lore accuracy, by comparison. So be aware that they are a very bad example of what you should be taking as, well, truth for what happened with the good old Nehekaran gods.
Yep. All right. Then we've got, I think we got two more. Sean Schultz, is there anything Gotrek has not killed?
Oh yeah, tons of things.
Oh yeah, just because he can't be everywhere at once.
Yeah.
That being said, I think if you were to ask a Black Library author, the result, I think that would be kind of one of like the joke rules of the internet, where it would be, if there's not a story about Gotrek killing it, it's like Gotrek has killed everything there is, and if he hasn't, it just means they haven't written that book yet. Would probably be the way they would actually approach it.
It's a fair comment.
Yeah. And then the last one for right now is Sherbs. Thank you for the hours and hours of entertainment. I appreciate the heck out of you guys. Have some shekels. Thank you for the shekels.
I'd just like to also bring up a comment from Quintus Fontaine, because you do realize what stream you're watching.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So, what's very, very interesting about Gotrek and Felix, as far as various changes and stuff are concerned, and I just got I will be right back. I just got a little emergency message that I'm needed downstairs for just a moment. So I will be back in just a minute. If Andy can hold the fort for just a moment, I will be here. I'll take my headphones with me so I can hear what's being said. I'll be right back.
Goodbye. I have been left abandoned. So, as I was saying, I'm going to say something that's slightly separate as I fill up your screen here. Sotek's gone, so I'm free to do wherever I want. I'm going to bring up one other thing about Gotrek and Felix that for me is a super important part. Gotrek and Felix, because they were brought over into the Warhammer game, were the first time where characters that everybody been discussing because they've been reading the books popped up in the battlefield. And Gotrek and Felix had their own miniatures that came out back in the early 90s, and they would have other ones released later, particularly from Black Library. And I actually adored seeing them every time they came up, because they came redolent with story. Any other character that you brought to the table back in those Warhammer days, back in the 90s, they were just pretty much made for the battle game, and they didn't have any stories. They just had generally one page of, this character's super important, you should use it in your army, he only cost £20. Nowadays it would cost around about 95 or some equivalent. But Gotrek and Felix, they were proper storied characters. So whenever they came out on the table, everyone weirdly sort of gathered round to see what was going to happen with them. And they were, because they had back then a unique rule Gotrek's doing with its 4+ save. That rule was to become standard in Warhammer as a ward save, but at that point was just unique and interesting, and we loved watching that character almost survive, not quite survive, and make its way through. I will also, while Sotek's away, just give you a brief moment to consider, have you done that thing that almost certainly has been brought up in the chat? Pre-ordered yourself a copy of Darties. I feel like such a shill for doing this. But it is a game that was, you can see the back there, put together by Mark, who did the very first art for Gotrek and Felix. And for those of you wondering where the heck Sotek went, he just had a brief emergency. He'll be back in a moment. We're just waiting for him to return. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to just quickly check if there's any chats that have come in. Hey, Jonathan Scott. Favorite moment in Gotrek and Felix was when a priest of Sigmar starts speaking in Khazalid, and Felix realizes Gotrek could have taught him to speak it at any time. Absolutely. That's a good one, actually, Jonathan. Like that one. Going down to Nagarash. I love that I'm able to catch a stream. Hey! I'm glad that you managed to make it. Shame Sotek had to disappear for 5 minutes. If you could choose a place, an enemy that they haven't explored, fought in the books, which would you choose? So I would like to see them, if they're going to be brought back, so to speak, and we're going to have some new tales post Old World, because obviously Gotrek is too young to be doing the thing back during the Old World times where he's pretty much just being born. I would like to see something that was focusing on the Ogre Kingdoms through to Cathay, largely because that's somewhere that's not really been explored, and they've got more than enough time during their long treks through Kislev up into the World's Edge Mountains to make some diverting, let's say, side adventures through those areas, because I think there's a lot of incredibly cool stories that we've yet to potentially have told through that particular lens, and I think that would be super, super, super fun. Other than that, I do have my own favorites, because a lot of the stories pretty much focus on the Old World. I would really like to see them move through Nagaroth down into parts of Nagaroth that aren't explored. As we said earlier on in the stream in the introduction, Gotrek and Felix did something that very few other no other Black Library character did. And that is, whenever they explored somewhere new and they added extra detail, hey, you're back! When they added extra detail, the detail that they added often felt like it was new core detail for that area, and the army lists often followed in the footsteps of Gotrek and Felix. That being the case, I would very much love to also see them hark over towards Nagaroth and go into those unexplored northern New World locations that they could tell some super fun stories with. So yes.
Yeah, and I would very much agree with everything that Andy has said in my absence, 100%.
Yeah, 100%. So we're caught up with our super chats, and you're good to go.
Yeah, so what I wanted to start with, as far as Gotrek and Felix, one of the things that I find super duper interesting that's really worth jumping into, I think, is to show how dramatic their impact is on the setting versus any other character, literally any other character, is that when other characters have had books and novels, you have side characters or villains or whatever introduced that make an appearance, and then they're kind of gone, and it's like just self-contained thing. But for Gotrek and Felix, many of these characters became famous characters in their own rights, despite the fact they originally only existed to further the Gotrek and Felix story. Probably the most infamous example, of course, being Thanquol and Bone Ripper. Yes. Which Thanquol and Bone Ripper, of course, are the most famous Skaven duo in the setting. Even though Bone Ripper is many different individuals, all bearing the same name, because Thanquol is, poor Thanquol is hilariously unoriginal. But Thanquol is an amazing character that's been around for a really, really long time. Of course, introduced in Skaven Slayer, the second book. He is the first persistent antagonist to Gotrek and Felix, and he survives the entire series amazingly, and has even survived in Age of Sigmar. And is quite literally the manifestation of, I think, everyone's favorite aspects of the Skaven smushed into one incredibly paranoid, warpstone snorting, crazy wizard who is almost as much of an antagonist to the Skaven as he is to Gotrek and Felix, which is just everything. Yeah, which is just shows how wonderful of a character he is. But like where Gotrek and Felix, excuse me, kind of remained these Black Library-esque characters who were very much about, they're wandering adventurers, so while you can use like White Dwarf rules or what have it to take them on a Dog of War rules or whatever to take them, they weren't really dedicated to one particular army. They were kind of like these goofballs that were running around and were always referred to as criminals or outlaws.
Dwarfs. They were marked in the dwarf army list.
Oh, well, there you go.
Just to be clear.
But they fell out of it. I think around I want to say sixth. Yeah, you could not take them any more than 6 without needing a White Dwarf rule set. Yep. But Thanquol, on the other hand, in 6th edition became full on like enmeshed as the Skaven special character, where he was in every single edition of the book. Like you couldn't have a Skaven book without Thanquol and Bone Ripper as one of your big Lord level characters. Like he took up a really important slot. And his rules were absolutely hilarious to try and explain how he survived all of his encounters with Gotrek and Felix, to where he had one of my favorite rules ever introduced into Warhammer, where he had a very good ward save on the condition that any attacks that would potentially hit him on a 4-up would miss and hit somebody else around him, which was hysterical. In that the Great Horned Rat literally liked him so much that he just makes somebody else die in Thanquol's place. Which for Skaven is a perfect rule. Like that
says a lot about the Horned Rat.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, I adore Thanquol. He's just so much fun, and I couldn't agree more. What they also did was they used Gotrek and Felix to introduce characters that they had just made up. For example, Manfred, good old Manfred, we do love our Karstein. He was introduced by Gotrek and Felix, having a good old fight off with him, and that was back in the army list, and those became anthology stories that would be released much later, when they gathered all of the stories that had been used over time. So they weren't just used to create new characters that were then brought into the battle game. They were also used to introduce characters to the battle game and make you, because you already liked good old Felix and Gotrek, go, hey, this character's got history. This character's actually part of the world, because Gotrek and Felix, at least in those points during the 90s, were used as characters throughout multiple army lists, not just in the Dwarf army list, because they were relatively popular at that point and had been in some of the novels. Now, sadly, at that point, no one quite realized what was going to happen with Black Library, so the very first ones everyone thought were going to fail. It wasn't until much later that Black Library proved itself to be an absolute bomb. Boom. All the books sold. That we managed to get all the Gotrek and Felix books that came later. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so as far as talking about, so we have the characters that of course became legacy characters in their own rights, your Thanquols and Bone Rippers, your Ulricas, Ulrica Magdava, who both had their own trilogy of novels released that followed their stories, while also appearing in later Gotrek and Felix books. You also had characters who became fan favorites but did not end up reaching that level of acclaim, with like Snorri Nosebiter and Max Schreiber. But what I think is kind of worth talking about for a moment, that as far as some really fun little notes, is characters that changed, actually. So you had like the original version of a character that was introduced, and then because Warhammer changed, the character had to change, which can actually cause a little bit of fun confusion. Like I said, the only big ones that I'm aware of are very, very early characters that are introduced. Probably the most famous example, and why I often warn people when they're starting Gotrek and Felix that the first book can be a little weird, a little jarring for more modern fans, is that A, it's not a traditional novel, it's an anthology, where it's a bunch of different short stories that are slapped together to tell an overall narrative. Like the actual Troll Slayer story is, I think, the last one in the book, which can be a little like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. But then you hit Skaven Slayer and it turns into a more traditional novel format. But in Troll Slayer, there is a very particular character introduced, which is good old King Belagar Ironhammer. But if you play the Total War game, or we're playing like 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, you'd squint as you're reading that novel and go, this isn't Belagar. This isn't the Belagar I know. Who the hell is this old man? Who's this old, sad, depressed dwarf king who's just like weak and sad and sitting on his throne and just like raving and ranting? But he's just kind of, he feels like, and the story very much portrays him as someone that is just kind of waiting to die, cooped up in his citadel. But that's the original Belagar. As the Carrick 8 Peaks narrative was kind of originally told, was that Belagar was much older in kind of the traditional sense, like what you think of when you think of an old man, as opposed to an old dwarf, which is fascinating because it introduces a lot of fun aspects of his character that kind of survived into the newer version we got in 8th edition, but obviously they made him more fighty and more, despite the fact he's still very old. Like, he's not as old as, like, say, Thorgrim, but he's still got like a full white beard and he's been around for a long time.
Yep.
But obviously they make him into, you know, more of this rage against the dying of the light character instead of grumbling against it. But it makes for such kind of a fascinating evolution to just see how characters appear, but they need to go through shifts in order to match whatever Games Workshop was trying to accomplish at the time. With Bellegarde also kind of being an example of a character who I would say before 8th edition was more well known for his Gotrek and Felix appearance.
Yeah.
Than them going, oh, you know what? Well, this is a character we can make into a new tabletop mini with like new rules and stuff. But if we're going to do that, he needs to be angrier.
Yeah. You tend to find that with a lot of the characters that get ported over. They start off as relatively standard characters when they're in, say, a Black Library novel. And then they get picked up by the battle game and they go, so how do I make this character fighty? How do I make this character much more capable on the battlefield? And I always found Felix particularly interesting because Felix literally changes through the course of the books from being what is just a poet, agitator, scholarly type who very much is on the run and is not in the best place in his life. And he turns into what can only be described as a kick-ass mother as he moves from place to place, just as terrifying in many respects as Gotrek. But because he's beside Gotrek, looking not as terrifying as he actually is, he is quite simply ridiculous by the end. And in many respects, that's because they're matching him up to both the battle side and the character that gets written by other authors is no longer tied to its original conception. All they have is the battle to draw from. So Felix gets upgraded and upgraded again until eventually it's quite clearly marked when one author goes, you don't appear to be getting older anymore. Nathan, I think, wrote this bit.
Yeah, Nathan,
what's going on, Felix? Why aren't you getting older? And they all have a little chin wag as to exactly why. He's effectively become immortal. The characters change significantly. And this is the case all the way through. Max changes significantly through the books as well. But again, if you didn't go from the beginning of Warhammer through to the end, you don't necessarily see it, particularly because with later publications, lots of edits were made, tiny edits, but lots of little edits were made so that things like the Colleges of Magic, as I mentioned already, got inserted where previously they weren't there in the first publications. So you'll find that through the course of time, to ensure the books are kept up to date, lots of little changes were made, much like Genevieve over on Jack Yovel's books, Kim Newman's books. She was turned into a Lamian. She wasn't to begin with. She was just a vampire. There was no Lamians when that character was made. So lots of little edits are made throughout the course of the books. But the later ones consolidate that all. So pretty much from when Bill King leaves, the Black Library hold, and in some respects the studio hold over that, tightens, and the changes in background are put in place to reinforce everything that Warhammer is going to be.
Yeah, and it's really weird and fascinating to watch a series that like was really guided and directed by a singular author with Bill King, and he does a phenomenal job. Like his contribution to the Gotrek and Felix series, it is not unusual at all. Although I don't personally agree with this because I think there are merits to each of them. But it's not unusual to meet people that enjoy Gotrek and Felix, and they'll say something along the lines of, "I loved Gotrek and Felix. It's an amazing series until Bill King stopped writing." Like they get up to Giant Slayer. And then the book after that, they're like, and they hate Nathan Long's writing, and they don't like the side stories by Josh Reynolds, and they don't like the way that David Geimer wrapped everything up. They're enthusiasts because there is a shift in how the stories are done. Certainly, of that, something that Andy said I very much agree with is that Bill King's version is the most grounded, where. Although Gotrek and Felix go up against some pretty insane things, from a greater demon to a dragon, you know, they're fighting some like absolutely insane shit. The books do make it very, very clear that they are flying by the seat of their pants.
Yep.
And they are so hilariously outgunned that it's a miracle they survive. Like, even when they do survive, you will literally get to the ends of the books and it will be something like Gotrek is wrapped from head to toe in a full body cast because he's basically dead. He just is kind of stubbornly refusing to die because he didn't die in the actual fight. And he's like, well, it'd be lame for me to die after the fight, so that can't happen.
Yeah, pretty much.
And Felix is usually the reason he survived, much to Gotrek's annoyance, which we'll talk about more of that dynamic in a minute. But when you get to Nathan Long's writing, Nathan Long kind of has an interesting pivot where he kind of changes it from Gotrek and Felix survived due to pure stupid luck / maybe a little bit of fate interference and their relationship with one another, to Gotrek and Felix are legitimately defeating these opponents. Like, it's still difficult. It still comes at a price, and there's still a lot of side characters that are dying and all this other stuff, but they're legitimately winning as opposed to barely eking it out. And it only kind of gets more ridiculous as you get into even the later books. Like in many of Josh Reynolds' books and David Geimer's, a lot of the opponents they fight aren't really able to threaten them that much.
Nope.
It's more about like they have a goal they're trying to accomplish, and Gotrek and Felix are trying to disrupt the plot instead of really being at threat of dying. Like, even if you read, like, I think David Geimer did a brilliant job with it, because it makes sense when you're reading through the books back to back that, well, of course, that thing wouldn't be a threat to them. They killed this other thing that was like way fucking scarier. So why would this thing be a threat? And it works really, really well, but it can be jarring if you really liked that one particular style with Bill King's to suddenly find yourself in, like, say, you know, if you go from reading Dragon Slayer and Demon Slayer, and all the second you find yourself in Orc Slayer, where Orc Slayer, it's a horror story. It's not really a like, oh, we're building up to fight this epic final boss who's unstoppable. It's more of, we're fighting against an enemy who is completely assaulting your mind, not your body, and how that's going to change things and be very spooky. Which is, it's a fascinating dynamic, and you're not going to find it anywhere else in Warhammer.
Yeah, it's really, and I know we discussed this right at the beginning, but it is really stark, because you do have the original intention, and then that intention, when the first author, Bill King, moved on, was replaced by the need of Games Workshop and what they wanted the characters to be. Individual writers who then obviously added in their own style, their own flair, their own elan to these particular stories, but they were still stories that were tightly controlled by Black Library's editors, unlike previously where the stories were largely written by Bill King according to the needs, obviously still edited by the editors at Black Library et al., but there was no longer that weight of control that sat behind it. And I think it's a quite heavy tonal shift. And they did it as well as they could. 20 years of separating them. They are much more experienced, much more capable. They have been through so much more. Contrary to many people's general expectation, Gotrek, in the greater scheme of things, isn't that old. He's not a 500, 600-year-old dwarf who's just been going on and on and on and on. He's only a couple of hundred. Well, no, he's even that. He's about 160, 170. So he's an oldish dwarf, but he's not that old. And through the course of that 20 years, he consolidates himself from being what he was left at in Giant Slayer, which, let's be honest, wasn't that far away from being a mega superhero anyway.
He's kind of insane by Giant Slayer's
By
point.
that point, he's already pretty goddamn massive, but now it's 20 years of consolidated awesome. And when Nathan takes over, he's given a character who is effectively a minor god walking, alongside another character who is, still having to be alive some 20 years later. So how do I justify this? Oh, right, so I have to justify it this way. Another minor god walking, as the pair of them are plunging through from adventure to adventure to adventure. But those adventures now very much are them confronting a thing and resolving it. Actually coming in and fixing things, making a big difference. And the tone changes. It had to, because of the nature of what happened. But for some people, that tone is exceedingly jarring. And for the old guard, too jarring. The old guard who may have started off in the original still prefer Warhammer back in its 3rd edition or 4th edition of the battle game. When they see where the books have gone and what they have done to their beloved characters, there are some people who refuse to accept them. And as I said earlier, there are others who look back at the original ones, get completely bewildered. They're like, what's going on? These aren't the characters I recognize. All the things I expect to be here aren't. Oh, it's beginning to, as the books pass on. Oh, tech list. Yes. Chaos. Demons. Oh, it's all beginning to make sense now. And then, boom, Nathan Long's books and then the other books afterwards come along. And it now feels like to them that finally Gotrek and Felix are here. So if you're coming at them for the first time, be aware that you have basically more than one set of books. You've got the William King books. You've got the Nathan Long books, and then you've got what are effectively all the other anthology books that come afterwards, written by multiple authors, and then capped off by David Geimer at the end. And it's effectively 3 phases of their life. When they are young and getting together and basically getting through scrapes and barely surviving, until eventually, because they've barely survived some truly crazy stuff, they get some stuff in return, and they become really quite capable. And then 20 years passed, and they have been capable for 20 years. The tales are different. They're taking along a bunch of stories, and then a completely different set come in, which start harking back to the past again. Interestingly, almost like they're trying to reground it, while simultaneously making them even more so the crazy, over-the-top characters until we hit the end, and it couldn't get more over the top if it tried.
Yeah. But one of the other things that plays into that's really, really fascinating when you're reading through it, and something I encourage you to look out for as a reader to enjoy how Warhammer has changed, is you can actually see Gotrek and Felix's, because of the nature of how popular the characters were, Games Workshop often encouraged Black Library to include them in major events, major campaigns. But this would lead to some really funny moments where later Games Workshop would retcon those campaigns out of existence or want to significantly change their events. But they have this awkward situation of Gotrek and Felix being there or being involved. And instead of just getting rid of those stories, they would basically just tell the future author, just make it work. Just make it work somehow. And Gotrek and Felix is one of the only examples that I'm aware of in Warhammer where it never retcons itself. It just tries to find a way to make it work.
It's particularly funny given that some of the books, because Felix is obviously Gotrek's chronicler, his rememberer, that he promises to be. We should probably do a little bit of who they are.
Yeah, we'll probably explain who they are here in a minute.
Yeah, just to make sure we do that. We're trying to avoid spoilers in this one, which we know it's going to be very hard.
Yeah, we're almost at the halfway point, though, so
we should probably do that. But he's basically his rememberer, and they're publishing the books of their tales, and some of the books are published after the world has ended.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a thing.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah, so but you can see some really cool moments. And I'll actually say when we get to the 1 hour 30 mark, I think that'll be we've talked for long enough for those of you who didn't want spoils that we can get into the deep dog spoilers and not feel
we're gonna have to do it eventually.
Because they are a fascinating pair. They do participate in everything from the Albion Crisis, which according to some of the later books didn't happen, to the Storm of Chaos, which didn't happen, but they were there, to quite a few other shenanigans. But one of the things that I really love about it is that the future authors didn't just like say, oh no, that just didn't occur. They try to make it work, which is how I wish Games Workshop proper had dealt with it instead of just retconning, because the retcons are just bleh.
Well, it's understandable, though, because if you take, for example, the good old Nemesis Crown campaign, that happens after the world is blown up.
Yeah.
In terms of its actual dates. The world is already gone by the time that happens. Karl Franz, in that particular campaign, is an old man, a far older man, as they all fight across the, effectively, Middenland in search of good old Alaric the Mad's crown. And, yeah, Gotrek and Felix are there, too. So... yeah, it's difficult to incorporate those things because time was originally presumed to continue on, and then they went, actually, no, the final end times have come, and the world has blown up before 25, let's say 30 at the very latest, has come about. But some of the chronicles of Felix and Gotrek are published in-game at that time, which obviously can't happen because the world done blown up. So yeah, there are some issues. So shall we go right back to the very beginning and give us a little intro to the characters?
After Super Chats, yes.
I think that's a fine idea.
So, Viper Wolf, since we know Gelt was turned into a Stormcast, do you think Sigmar should have taken Felix as well?
No.
I don't, because Felix belongs to Gotrek, not to Sigmar.
Yeah. I just no. If I was going to be bringing Felix back, there is, given the nature of how he ended, and given the nature of what Felix had become through the course of the novels, more than enough reason for him to have existed through to Age of Sigmar if you wish to do so. Now, obviously, my preference would be to continue Lovely Tales back in the good old Warhammer world that we know and love, the world that was. However, that's clearly not going to happen unless something really unexpected occurs. So that being the case, I would very much like to see him eventually make that transition and come over, because the more characters we get from Warhammer over there, the more it will begin to feel like Warhammer for folks like myself who look at it and go, yeah, it's a lot of cool models, but it's not Warhammer.
Yeah, and I would say very much that for Felix to come back and be a proper fun character, that's supposed to be what Felix is, which is that he is our guide. Like, he's not Gotrek's guide, he's the reader's guide to what's going on. Felix would need to be human, or very, very close to human adjacent, like just a basic human. Because otherwise he can't point out to the reader how ridiculous everything is and how like powerful things are. Like the thing that made Gotrek and Felix so awesome, and is why I often use it as an introductory series for people, is because Felix, even though he does not know what our world is like, he's just a human like we are. At least he starts as one.
He's our everyman. He's the everyman character that we gain access to the world through. He's effectively our route in, so to speak.
Yeah, Felix is what helps you understand that, yeah, sure, on the tabletop battle game or in Total War, Beastmen Gores are a lower tier unit or a basic bitch core unit, but in the lore, from a human standpoint, a Beastman Gore is fucking horrifying and is a massive muscled brute with 2 axes who could easily, brutally murder a human unless they are on their absolute A game, where Felix struggles. You know, where people look at goblins, and because of Total War or the battle game, people go, oh, how is a goblin a threat? I could just punt a goblin. Yeah. But you read Gotrek and Felix helps you understand that, no, goblins are fucking terrifying. And they may be small, but they're vicious little bastards. And they fight with like wanton savagery. And Felix, who is a trained duelist, struggles against a goblin. Like, he'll win, yeah, but it's scary.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, actually. One of the great things that people forget about Warhammer is that the things that are hewn down easily by Gotrek are super scary, and that's why Felix is so required. Now, Felix, as just discussed, he is a trained swordsman. Lechtenauer, can't recall. It's something like that. Anyway, he went to a particular single sword school when he was in Altdorf, where he was taught a particular type of
fencing style. Yeah.
A fencing style called Lechtenauer. I've written it in another rulebook because I wrote a style for it once ages ago for Fantasy Roleplay, and it's not quite sticking in my head. It's really annoying me. But regardless, he went over there and he learned that. Before he even meets Gotrek, he is already a trained swordsman, and he has his ass handed to him again and again and again. I had somebody ask me in a different stream, how many goblins do you think you could kick in? The answer is none. Absolutely none. Those things are murderous, horrible creatures that can easily overpower even the most capable warriors in the real world. Because you got to remember, stat line for stat line, they're the same as a fully trained soldier in Warhammer. Someone that has faced everything in Warhammer. Stat line for stat line, bar their leadership, they're just as good. So get that in your head, and that's why Felix is so necessary. He is our everyman. He is our stand-in. He is the one that tries to contextualize everything, which is one of the reasons that over an Age of Sigmar, everything just kind of, it's boom! So nothing is really boom, because everything's just so big that everything just kind of feels the same. And that's why you need those contrasts. Without the contrasts, like without someone like Felix, nothing really feels big. Particularly when you have someone like Gotrek, who will almost certainly walk over everything between him and whatever he's going for. That being the case, you need that contrast, and Felix is perfect for that.
Yep, and that's why he's awesome and a really important character. And that's also why I kind of understand why they put him off to the side for a while in AOS, because they wanted to have characters who understood the world of AOS being able to explain what makes Gotrek so weird and crazy. I don't think it worked as well, and I think the authors agreed because of what they do to those side characters in the end. But once again, we're not to the spoiler mark yet. Let's see, where was I? I was here. What's Gotrek and Long Drong's Krakadrak cousin called? Long Trek. All right. Thanks, Hammond. Fernando Corona. Do you guys have a favorite Slayer side character besides Malachi and Snorri? For example, I thought Leatherbeard from Orc Slayer was really, really cool. My favorite, I can't remember his name, but my favorite side dwarf character is actually the Slayer from the Slayer other main character from oh gosh, Road of Skulls. There's a Slayer character in there who's very similar to Gotrek in that he also has a human remembrancer, but their relationship is very different. Where that Slayer is far more positive in a lot of his outlooks. Like, he's a Slayer, and obviously he has that trauma and tragedy behind him, but ultimately he has like a fairly like upbeat attitude compared to Gotrek, and it leads to kind of several funny moments where Felix is it's causing Biter, yes, Biter, and it's causing Felix to kind of constantly wonder about like if his particular relationship with Gotrek should be better than it is, but Gotrek's just such an ornery asshole that he's been doomed to like not get to learn anything or just have this really negative experience. And you end up learning over the course that no, it's better that Gotrek is Gotrek for other reasons. But it helps paint that not all Slayers are like Gotrek. They're not all angry, sad, bitter things. There is some really interesting complexities to them, even if they're as experienced as Gotrek, but just in different ways.
Yeah, I was looking around for my one of my other books because I couldn't remember the name of the character. So I'm going to come back in that one because there's a particular one I want to call out. I had my books all laid there.
Okay, fair. Biofoot. Do you guys think Gotrek and Felix can figure out why Games Workshop is making AOS and total the old world compete rather than synergize? This is kind of an old problem for Games Workshop. There's actually a video that just came out by I think it's the Wargaming Corner. I'll post a link to it on my Twitter later today. But there's a video that just came out from a former GW employee that really kind of talks about why Games Workshop, from an internal marketing reason, makes a lot of these really weird decisions. And it's not unusual for companies. Like, it's a very well established strategy for companies, but it's particularly stupid for what Games Workshop does, because their company is based on like entertaining fans as opposed to making like a more traditional product. But it's a mess is the best thing I can say. There are reasons for it, but they're messy and dumb.
They're stupid. They should just get their act together. That's it.
Yeah. Gotrek Curtisan. I hear you, Umgi. Keep saying my name. Yep. We're going to keep going too, so get a drink. Hobby Squire. Hey guys, glad you're doing an episode of my favorite characters, one of my favorite book series. Too bad I'll have to catch it later. If you haven't heard the audiobook narration of Jonathan Keeple, it's awesome. I keep hearing that. And yes, the Gotrek
I haven't heard it.
Series.
I've only read them.
Yeah, the Gotrek Felix series, almost the entire series is now on like Audible very easily. So, you know, that's something you can look into if you prefer it to listen to it as opposed to reading it. Let's see. Gotrek Curtisan. On a serious note, how would you stat me in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4? I just don't understand how stats over 100 work. You mentioned 400 for Scroll.
So I'm actually about to tackle this for my own game. The upper end of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, and I'm not going to spend very long on this because it's a complete tangent from what we're actually here to do. But the upper end of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 is very poorly explored. Now, obviously, it hasn't been explored at all by the current publishers because they don't, it seems, truly understand how it works with stats over 100, meaning that you don't have an easy guideline that you can follow from published characters. That means that you either have to do it yourself or wait for somebody you think is going to be able to do it for themselves that you trust. If that person is me, I'm currently going through restatting all of the characters for the Power Behind the Throne because the stats that I've got in there are actually terrible. And I'm building them up for what will work for my game. I'm posting them at the moment over for the patrons on the LAWhammer side, and once they're all finished, I will have a very clear process in place for dealing with all my high-end stats that will range from whether we're doing something that's just a very powerful human up to a 1,500, 2,000-year-old elf or whatever. So I'll have that all in place, and I'm going to pop up not behind a paywall. That's going to be just going up to Patreon. So once I finish, I'm going to establish a complete model that hopefully anyone can follow. So the answer to that is watch this space.
Yep. Also, fun fact, did you know that Gotrek shows up in a LAWhammer episode? I'm not going to tell you which one. You're just going to have to go watch LAWhammer and see for yourself.
I'd forgotten that. That was fun.
Yeah, you also get to see Andy roleplay as Gotrek, which comes with a sound warning for people that have headphones.
I had fun. It was very silly.
Viper Wolf, will you talk about Gotrek's reason for taking the oath / him fighting or killing dwarves who tried to prevent? Yes, we will. And we're past the 1 hour, 30-minute mark. So let me get through these super chats, and we're going to just start talking about like actual spoiler stuff. Phil5991, what is a remembrancer anyway? You didn't talk about it in your Slayer stream. How many Slayers have one of those? So this is actually probably worth a brief aside of that. So Felix is what's known as a rememberer, or I think there's some author that accidentally called it a remembrancer.
Yeah.
But essentially, it is an individual. It's not always a human. I think actually many times, historically, it was probably a fellow dwarf. Yeah. But often it is someone who agrees to take on a responsibility to follow a Slayer around and basically watch them die. To be present when that Slayer achieves their doom. That way they can witness it and take the knowledge of what happened back to the Karazankor and be able to say that, hey, so-and-so has fulfilled their Slayer oath. They have successfully achieved that glory. And this is what happened. This is how it went down. Because once they achieve their doom, that is a very, very notable oath being fulfilled, which is a big deal. The dwarfs, they often don't get to know about that, and that's just kind of something they have to accept. But getting to know about that, especially if that Slayer had any living relatives, is very, very important. But it's very hard because there's the very implied aspect of if you're a rememberer and the Slayer gets killed by something, that something is probably still around, and you're probably not as scary as the Slayer you were traveling with. So you very well are probably going to die too.
Although it is also worth mentioning that many Slayers aren't that scary.
That's true. Yeah, a lot of them die. Most Slayers
dwarfs.
Die in the first year.
Yeah, they're just dwarfs. They're dwarfs who've taken an oath, and that oath obviously is important, and it does things to dwarves. We know that oaths and dwarves can make a significant difference to what they are. But they are still, in the end, just dwarfs. It takes something special for them to be a Slayer that's lasted for a while. And that's when it does become scary. Plus, you've also got, if the oath is not fulfilled, they don't die in the right way, for example, and their honor is not reclaimed. Oh, that's bad. It's not necessarily a good career to have, being a rememberer.
Yeah, and that's the other aspect, is that it's a risk being one, both to yourself and that the Slayer may die from something more mundane or just accidental, in which case, like, technically you're sworn to report that, which means that they died in vain. So their oath is unfulfilled, which could cause someone else to become a Slayer. Yeah,
absolutely.
Which is tragic. So there's almost kind of an interesting dichotomy of modern dwarfs probably are not super comfortable with the idea of rememberers because they know of that implication. Because although the dwarfs would never admit it, or they might punch you for suggesting so, if the Slayer dies anonymously, well, then we can hopefully just safely assume that he died honorably. Which, you know, kind of has a...
I'm quite sure there'll be some dwarfs who'll be looking to try and find that particular outcome just to make sure that their family honor is properly intact. It's not going to be something they're going to let lie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hammond, yesterday when you talked about minor gods, did you mean godchildren for kids, or minor gods as an individual gods for dwarf miners? Get out, Hammond.
Quite clearly for the miners.
For the miners, yeah. Aaron Stravar.
Hey,
Oh, my
Aaron.
glorious long beards. May your grumbling be great and answered. Question: is Felix the same to the dwarfs as Sigmar is? No, because Felix just
Not at
doesn't
all.
have that list of accomplishments by any means or
Not
stretch
at
of the
all. And
imagination.
it's not just that. You got to realize that Gotrek sucks. He's a slayer.
Yeah.
Just because you're hanging out with a slayer who has done all these great things, you could also argue he's an honorless piece of toe scum that did the very worst thing possible, had to take the Slayer Oath, and the poor sod that's going around with him is not someone you would particularly honor. There are many different ways it could be taken, and there is as many different dwarfs out there who will have their own opinion as to this as there is, well, dwarfs in existence. Is Felix de Vonger? That's the big one.
Yeah, it depends. It also depends on the author. But I think generally speaking, it's better to think of Felix because he's with a Slayer. It tends to be less that he's a dwarf friend and more that he's like a diplomat who is allowed into places and to hear things that normally humans wouldn't, because he has to know the story. He has to be present, which makes, if anything, would make dwarves like him less.
Yeah. But you will find though that it's as variable as the authors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mandates. I just realized Felix is Gotrek's crony. I love the cause of the English jokes.
That's actually quite. You know what? I never noticed that one.
Yeah, that's actually funny.
Because because Kron, if you don't know, in Kazalid is the chroniclers. The Kron is the great saga. So crony is someone who's recording that, the rememberer, someone who's remembering something. Okay, so he's basically his crony. Yeah, I love that. Oh, that's a really good one, Mandatus. I completely missed that.
Good pickup on that. Aaron Sugar. P.S.
Love
I
that.
ship Felix with the Tomb Queen. They make a cute couple. I assume you don't mean the Tomb Queen and you mean her what do you call it? Her herald. The Herald of Kalida from Tomb of the Serpent Queen, who there is some hilarious things that happen in that particular novel. In that Felix, one of the things that the authors run with to kind of poke fun at Bill King, though they don't do it in a mean way, it's done in a honest, funny way, is there are some authors that run with the joke that because Ulrika, who was a lover of Felix's, established by Bill King, she ends up becoming a vampire. And there's very much a very will they, won't they aspect to Ulrika and Felix after she becomes a vampire, of will they ever be able to get over that hill of that she's undead and he isn't and rekindle their love, or will they forever remain apart because a living person and an undead just can't? And there are some authors that poke fun at it by having it where whenever Felix encounters a woman who's undead, that there's like a natural attraction there, which always causes Felix a very horrible personal dilemma that Gotrek often verbally pokes fun at his expense. Which is, I enjoy that. It's a fun little piece of writing. Eric, I'd rather Felix just stumble out of a portal with no idea of how much time has passed because of warp/webboy weirdness. Maybe Techless grabs him out. Well, yeah, but like I said earlier, Felix wouldn't really work in AOS as a character if he has no idea what's going on. He needs to be more grounded than Gotrek, which Gotrek has no idea what's going on. So if both of them have no idea what's going on, you're going to have problems with the way the series is written. And the way that Black Library will tell you that the series has to be written. You need a guide character. Jonathan Scott, we learned that Felix's brother has been publishing all his writings as novels. Do you think dwarfs read them? And if so, what do they think of them? We know dwarfs read them. Granted, I think most dwarfs view them as like kind of either drivel, or they view them as made up, or like how dare someone be publishing this information. So they're usually not viewed well, but there are some dwarfs, particularly like imperial dwarfs, that are not part of the typical dwarf lifestyle, who are quite fond of them, and kind of can often see them as an insight into a different kind of life and can kind of pine for it. And then they meet the actual Gotrek and realize that he's not that fun.
Yeah. My one of the great conceits of it is that my travels with Gotrek, that's obviously published by the good old Jaegers, is potentially all bullshit.
Yeah.
Which gives them a great deal of leeway. It allows for all of the contradictions that lie within the books and the changed nature of the Warhammer world itself as it unfolds to lie there without worrying too much, because the books could just be bullshit. And the books that you're reading could just be bullshit. And that's cool. That works really nicely. And that allows them to have a certain amount of freedom in terms of how they present their books. Now, we know for a fact that they must be, because the publishing dates make no sense.
Yeah.
They literally make no sense. They refer to stories that can't have happened. So we know that perhaps Felix is just making crap up at points. But equally, we know that at other points, they definitely do happen. And I think that that is part of the fun of deciphering your way through the text. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, I think it's in, oh God, is it in Manslayer? One of the books, they go back to, one of the books, they go back to Altdorf and Felix meets with his brother. And Felix finds out that the books have been published all this time because he sent them back to be stored with his brother. And his brother was like, oh, well, we can make money off these. And one of the things that's revealed that's an in joke to also further explain this is you find out that his brother has had someone edit Felix's journals for release because there were certain things that they were like, oh, that's too heretical, or oh, there's a way we could twist this to make it more hilarious.
It's literally a joke as well, because that's what happened to the books.
Yeah, so there's an implication that some of the stories you've been reading aren't even necessarily Felix's original stories, that they've been either.
Are you still there? Have I frozen or have you frozen?
Well, I think we had a brief frozen, but I think we're back now.
Excellent, we're back. Brilliant.
Okay. I think we're good. Don't panic, everyone.
We're okay. We're fine.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. All right. Mask of the Eclipse says, I'd really like if they would do some stories following Zombie Slayer, because the time skip after that is just so brutal. Well, if it makes you feel better / worse, that's the third time skip in the series. So yeah. But I mean, Zombie Slayer is like from like these stories are definitely linear perspective. It's the last one going into the end times.
Yeah, it is.
And so it's just kind of it's just one of those situations where it's just kind of the end of the series.
Yeah, heading towards the end, and that's one of the reasons for the skips. There is obviously an absolute shed load of space for extra stories should they ever need to be written, should they ever want to write them. But I think that given the internal, let's say, differences between Warhammer 8th edition, between the old world and between Age of Sigmar, the chances of those gaps being filled are currently next to zero. But that doesn't mean it will never happen.
Yeah, it would literally just be because there's an executive somewhere that goes, you know what, we can make a lot more money off more Gotrek and Felix books. You there, make more of these.
Yeah, but you tend to find with Games Workshop, they're less interested in novels making money than they are in supporting their core systems. And their core systems matter. So if, for example, they're going to release novels, they want to release novels for the old world to a degree, but Age of Sigmar, definitely. 40k, definitely, because that is their core systems. So that's where you're going to be getting a lot of your novels, obviously 30k as well. So the chances of us releasing novels to support a game that doesn't exist, it's not just diminishingly small. I can't see it happening. This is where obviously the announcement comes out next week where they completely contradict that, but I find it exceedingly unlikely. We are basically in a position where the only chance of more Gotrek and Felix novels is if Felix should just pop up in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, and then you would probably have like flashback sequences, which could be fun.
Yeah, that could be fun. Yeah.
Yep. Hammond, do you think Felix could defeat a D's nuts joke? I'm sure he could. He's a poet. He's used to winding his way around clever wordings. Niels Andre, Felix is my favorite character. Thanks for the streams again. Well, thank you for the support. We really appreciate it. Madiosaurus, I think it's such a shame that they never meet the lizards. I can imagine how a Slan looks at them and instantly knows that they have a purpose in the great plan, similar to how Tekla sees them. So there is some minor notes about lizardmen. If you go read Gotrek and Felix, the Tomb of the Serpent Queen, Or
Yeah.
no, it's just the Serpent Queen. I always add the Tuma, but it's not. It's just the Serpent
Just
Queen.
Serpent Queen, yeah.
Because there is a aspect where they're in the Southlands, obviously, and Gotrek gets lost and fights some random lizardman for a bit. However, if you do want that kind of moment, I don't want to go too deep into what happens, but there is a full-on discussion between Gotrek and a skink priest in Blood of the Old World, which is an Age of Sigmar novel where you get to see a lizardman talk very frankly to Gotrek about what he is. And Gotrek really doesn't like it. It's kind of what it boils down to.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun discussion. It's also fucking hilarious to listen to because for some reason they chose to give the skink priest this like rumbling bass voice, which is not the voice I would give a skink. But so like it's like
that's a choice.
Yeah, it makes Gotrek's voice sound kind of high pitched in comparison by Brian Blessed. So it's really funny. But the conversation they have is genuinely fascinating because it's a character being like, Gotrek, you're part of this great plan. And Gotrek being like, fuck your plan, I'm going to do my own thing. And the lizard being like, well, yeah, but that's just you doing what the great plan says you're going to do. And it's a whole dynamic because Gotrek does not like the concept of fate at all. It's very distressing to him, understandably. Dr. Bloody, what's y'all's favorite fight in the series? Can be saved for spoiler section. We're in the spoiler section.
Yeah, we are.
I'll say I'm a little bitch and very predictable and sad and not interesting. So for me, it's Zombie Slayer because I love when special characters fight special characters. And Gotrek going up against Krell is fucking awesome.
Yeah, Krell.
Like they fight because it's one of the few books where we get to see Gotrek fight the same character like 4 or 5 times throughout the book because they fight and then they break apart and then later they fight and they break apart and it's awesome. I love seeing those two throw down.
I'm going to go a bit more generic and say that I love the skin of the teeth getting torn to shreds early combats, whether it's Slanesh cults or Skaven. I really love seeing them get their asses handed to them as they're pushing their way through towards something that's coming next. So in general, I prefer those. For a specific one, I mean, it's always fun trying to pull out something ridiculous like dragons.
Yeah, I will say the kind of the funny thing is that a more accurate Wolfrep example of like playing a Slayer and how ridiculous the fights are is that a lot of people they know, Gotrek's missing an eye and they're like, oh, what epic grand thing did he lose his eye to? What horrible monstrosity. It was a goblin wolf rider.
Wolf rider. One of the wolf riders. And yeah, they are the conflicts that I particularly enjoy because they feel dangerous. They feel properly dangerous. And they, in terms of tone, land a little bit heavier for me as you're just left going, this is fraught. It's not going to turn out well. Where later on, it feels so much less of that because not only is the plot armor really beginning to show now in that it's quite clear that they're not really in any proper danger until the very, very, very end. But they're so capable that the vast majority of things they face have to be epic to actually make a difference. And it becomes a matter of almost trying to one-up another writer each time. Yeah. I've got a thing that's bigger than the thing that you've chosen. No, I've got a thing that's bigger than the thing you've chosen. Gotrek's kicked its ass. And I find it less satisfying to read. So for me, I'm going to choose a very generic, mundane fights. And the opposite of the Krell option.
Yeah, there you go. You got two ends of the spectrum there.
I would have chosen Krell, but he did it first. So the opposite with mundane fights, the ones where you feel like when you're reading it, holy shit, they might die to just nobody by comparison. And that's, for me, one of the joys of the characters because they do go to some quite heavy extremes.
Yep. And like there are some fights that like even in the later series that do a really good job of demonstrating terrifying concepts, like how in Orc Slayer, Gotrek almost gets killed by random orcs that have learned how to use guns through a very weird but interesting final boss.
That's a thing.
Yeah, where it goes to show though, if greenskins were actually clever enough to use black powder, they'd quite literally be unstoppable.
And I remember having a discussion about that one at the time, and the odd arresting of orc technology. in comparison to say 40k, where the opposite is the case, and why that was the case, and should it still be the case. And we had a discussion behind the scenes as to another reason why it was the case. And I won't go into any depths there, but beyond saying the winds of magic were the answer we came up with.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah.
Aaron Streaver, again, thank you very much for all the super chats.
Hey, Aaron, you rock.
In regards to Felix being to dwarves what Sigmar was, or as similar as he was, named after the events of Eight Peaks with the troll and the hammer he used in Demon Slayer, I mean, there is a thing where there are some dwarfholds that would genuinely see Felix as a dwarf friend because of what he did in like Carrick Doom, where he helped save all those dwarfs and all of their treasures and relics and brought them back to the Karazhan Corps. That would be huge, and that there are a lot of the really, really good authors, Bill King in particular, will use that as when Felix meets dwarves and they're like, oh, you're that Felix. Okay.
Yeah, I actually think it's something that was missing. And I was trying not to say it when I said earlier, is he a dwarf friend? Because the answer should be yes.
Yeah, he should.
I mean, he should be. And I didn't go that far in my earlier comment because I felt it was a little bit unfair to the people who wrote it. But he really should. The number of things that he has done means that he should be recognized. Gotrek can't be. He literally can't.
Yeah.
He is fulfilling his oath. He is doing what he needs to do, and he's also a complete dick. Where, on the other side, Felix isn't. Felix is going out of his way to fulfill an oath that he has no right or expectation to fulfill. He is pursuing it to the bitter end. And what he is doing is more dwarfy than many dwarfs. He is quite simply awesome. And I think that would, in fact, I'm going beyond it, it would have been recognized. So instead of us saying that he's not, I would instead say there's a missing story. Yeah. Because there is a story here somewhere where probably the High King himself should have named him Dwarf Friend. While Gotrek slinks off really fucking upset. Because it's awful for him in a variety of ways, because it just throws in his face the mistakes that he's made, the oath that he had to take, and to see this happen on the side, oh man, and because of his deeds as well, I mean, it's just heartbreaking for the dwarf. It's awful, and that would be a great story, and it's missing at the moment. I feel it should be filled.
Yep. Vrin Medigan, Felix wielded the Hammer of Fate. How? So, for those who don't know what the Hammer of Fate is, in Demon Slayer, there's this big epic battle that happens at the end of the book that the build up to that battle is like unrivaled in any of the other Gotrek and Felix books. Like, it is, Demon Slayer is a masterpiece. I don't care what the fuck anybody else thinks. It's a masterpiece of a novel. And in it, the Dwarf King, whose name I can't remember at this moment, has this big old runic hammer called the Hammer of Fate that has all these master runes and crazy shit in it. And he's able to quite literally, essentially throw it like Thor's hammer. And it just obliterates whatever it runs into. And the greater demon gets hit by it. And like, this hammer is fucking ridiculous when it hits a bloodthirster. The bloodthirster's like, ow, ow. Yeah. So, but during the fight, the king gets killed and like shit's happening everywhere. And the hammer's laying on the ground. And the thing about the hammer is that it's really should not be possible to pick it up unless you're a dwarf. It kind of has the Mjolnir, can only be picked up by those who are worthy type sentiment.
Yeah, that.
And that's the thing, is that Felix essentially proves that he's worthy.
Yes.
Like, he literally is holding on to it and it's burning him. It's not just that he can't pick it up. It's like rejecting him. It's burning the shit out of his hands and he refuses to let go and literally starts begging every god he can think of among the dwarf and human pantheons to just let him pick up this goddamn hammer. And he barely picks it up just enough to aim it at the demon and let it go. And it hits him, and that sets off a chain of events that allows them to win. But it's the Hammer of Fate, and it's fate.
Yep, that. And again, should be a dwarf friend.
Yep. Yeah, because the second he picked up that hammer,
that's it. I mean, he should be a dwarf friend. I mean, if anything, that would have been a lovely way, for example, to have a really nice send off for the characters when you hit the end times. He should have been named a dwarf friend. He should have become effectively one of the most honored humans that have ever walked the bloody planet. Did that occur? It did not.
Yeah, because unfortunately that storyline really got lost after Bill King set the series down.
Yeah.
Yep. The game doctor, did the Mysterium come after me? Did the Mysterium come after me? No comment. I'm still here. That's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
Many assassins have tried to get into this house. Gotrek Garden said, I'd say my best fight was with Father Ruskull. Those who know. Also, thank you, Andy, for doing the work to stat me. Good old Andy. So,
it will come. There was some cheers, although
yes, there was.
Those. I found one.
You two got me into Warhammer Fantasy and got me to purchase a few of the PDFs. So this is my thanks to both of you. We apologize to your wallet, but not to you. Thank you.
No apologies at all. You are welcome. Literally no apology in the slightest. You're welcome. But I will apologize perhaps to your wallet. No, maybe you're right.
Yeah. Hammer of Fate. What do we name it? Fate Hammer. Yeah. Welcome to Warhammer.
I know. I didn't say anything, which, let's be honest, for me is rare.
What do we call this demon? Fate Claw. Yeah.
Oh, don't. Did we get... Oh, wait a minute. No. I was just about to bring up another one. Did we get that one? Oh, yes, we did.
Yep.
And did we get that one?
Yes. That was, it was the same thing. Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
We're fine.
And then Aaron Shriver, would the White Dwarf like Felix? Oh, yes. I think Grombrindle would deeply like Felix, but he would probably also feel really bad for Felix, because I think this is actually worth just hopping into now, because it's let's talk about some actual spoiler stuff. One of the things that's fascinating about Felix as a character is that a lot of people I don't think focus enough on that Felix puts himself through this, because there are many times where Gotrek releases him from his oath, and from an honor standpoint, he could walk away and nobody would think less of him for it. And he never does. And it's because, to put it completely bluntly, Felix loves Gotrek so much as like a brother, friend, however you want to look at it. Like, he loves Gotrek, but Gotrek is a slayer, and that is not good.
And I'll put it in return. Gotrek loves him.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's very easy to put aside. But Gotrek wants him to live. It's one of the reasons he keeps on trying to release him from his oath. He is his companion in arms. He is literally grounded by him. He makes life worthwhile, which is equally awful, because he doesn't want life to be worthwhile. He's a freaking slayer. But Felix is just astonishing in all ways in terms of how he has taken an oath on when he was drunk and pissed out of his skull because Gotrek saved his life during the window tax riots. And he keeps it all the way through. And even when he's released with it, he keeps it. He is, in terms of what Grombrindle would think, an almost perfect example of what humanity isn't. And he wouldn't just respect that. I think he would look and go, I was wrong.
Yeah,
I am wrong about humans, and this human in front of me proves it. Because good old Grombrindle has met Gotrek at least once that I can think of off the top of my head, when the silly story with him and Joseph Bugman. That's before he's even with
Felix. Yeah,
way back in the past. But yeah, I think if Grombrindle were to encounter Defo.
Yeah, Grombrindle, like, to the question somebody asked earlier, Grombrindle is probably the character who would catch others off guard by saying that Sigmar and Felix are not so different, which would probably make everyone go, that's ridiculous. But Grombrindle will be like, you don't understand.
Hey, given what we know about Sigmar, I think you might even say that he's better.
Yeah.
Particularly if you take a look at the current Sigmar lied coming from good old Age of Sigmar. Yeah. Okay, so, if that's the case, Felix is better.
Yeah. That being said, what would be super awesome is if someone were to tackle that story kind of nowish, because Grombrindle, due to his shenanigans, would probably know what's going to happen in the end, and would probably be like, I respect the hell out of you, but this is sad as fuck.
Yeah.
Like, a tragedy is not lost on Grombrindle.
Yeah, no, totally. Agreed entirely. Well, he would love it. He'd love Felix.
Yeah. Sotek, do you need Gotrek's help to finish? I don't think Gotrek would be helpful. Yeah.
Feel the burn.
I think the better question to ask is, could we get him in the editing room with my editors? And could Gotrek please not abuse them too much? And the answer would probably be no. because he's very abusive, even when he's not trying to be. Dr. Polly, how much overreactive Felix turned out to be? A Stormcast was hidden away because he possessed too much of his memory of the old world. I'd be annoyed.
I'd be disappointed. Very disappointed.
Especially because he's already showed up in Age of Sigmar. A lot of people don't necessarily know this. If you go read Ghoul Slayer, Felix just flat out appears. And they leave some breadcrumbs that very explicitly state that Felix is not with Sigmar. He is with somebody else. We don't know who, but he's with somebody else.
Yeah, so from my side, I have absolutely no care for Age of Sigmar. I don't dislike it or like it. It's just a thing that exists, and it's out there. But Felix and Gotrek do exist. There's several characters in Age of Sigmar that I have a certain amount of attachment to because they come from a setting that I adore deeply. So when I see what they become, I am interested. I look into what they've become. And sometimes I'm like, seriously? That's what they become? Other times I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Other times I'm like, well, that's batshit insane. But when it comes to Felix and Gotrek, I would be deeply unimpressed if what they did was turned him into a memoryless superhero. Get out of it. It does a disservice to the character and also ruins what he could be for Gotrek in terms of turning him into something interesting in Age of Sigmar. So I would be personally very upset if that were the outcome. No, that's too strong. I would be disappointed.
Yeah, like to put my perspective into a blunt sentence, I would prefer for Felix to be like an intangible ghost that only Gotrek can see and talk to than be a Stormcast Eternal. And that would not be a very good Felix, but I would prefer that version of Felix over Stormcast Felix.
Yeah, quite.
All right. Jack.
Hey,
Troll
Jack.
Slayer and Skaven Slayer were the first two Warhammer books I read. Such fun
Yay!
time. Subject for sharing this awesome world. Gotrek, Troll Slayer, I believe, was my first ever Black Library book.
It was, well, obviously, Black Library book is different to my first Warhammer book.
Yeah.
Okay, so my first Warhammer books are going all the way back to the Box Tree books that were the first sets of Warhammer books that came out. Ignorant Armies was probably my first, so that means that, similarly, the very first story, Geheimnisnacht, was also my first one.
Yep.
That's interesting, actually. That is interesting.
No. For a lot, and also thank you for the 888.
Yeah, super appreciated.
Very cursed. Jonathan Scott, the best way to start the story of Felix reappearing in AOS would be for Gotrek to learn what creature/character supposedly killed him in the old world. Well, the thing is, Gotrek knows how he died. Actually, if you want to have your heart fucking ripped out by David Geimer because he did such a good job with it, and you just want him to kick you in the balls as hard as he can, you read all of Gotrek and Felix, you read Slayer and Kinslayer to learn how Felix dies, which we'll get into in a minute, and then you go listen to the audio dramas for Slayer, for Realm Slayer and the Blood of the Old World, because in Blood of the Old World, Gotrek learns how Felix died. And it's fucking horrible. Yeah. Like, and the worst thing is David Geimer is such a dick. I love this about him. He's such a dick that he puts Gotrek in a position where Gotrek could have saved him. And he doesn't.
Yep.
And it's explained well why he doesn't, but it's horrible. It's horrible. Like, him and Gotrek get to talk as he's about to die. And like it's the worst. It is the worst.
Which is good. Yeah.
Yeah, which is perfect.
Go get your heart wrenched. It's worth it.
Yep. Aaron Streamer, I think Felix could make even Craig the Grim smile. Also, first time I'm here to catch you guys live, so I'm catching up.
Oh, Aaron. Delighted to hear that. And assuming I'm correct that it's the same Aaron that was speaking to us last night. It's Aaron, not Aaron, apparently, because we were
Aaron,
corrected last night. So indeed, just to know, pop up Mornington's cheers.
I personally hope Felix and his sword ended up with the Draconith. That would be kind of funny. Having a sword that makes you go into roid rage whenever you see a dragon and you're stuck amongst a bunch of dragons. So you're just pissed off all the time. I love that sword. That so like getting into just fun aspects, like I think we're just going to enjoy ourselves in the last hour about talking about some very fun aspects. But before we get into that, we're 2 hours in. Who are Gotrek and Felix?
Who the hell are they? I mean, we've sort of kind of suggested some bits about Felix, but I think it is worth going all the way back in time and saying, who is this Gotrek? Who is Gurney that he is the son of? Where does this all start? Oh, man, it's actually quite a tragic story, as is often the case with good old Slayers, because we're going to take you all the way back to, just about... When does it all kick off? It starts just after the Great War against Chaos, as I recall. I think it's about that date.
Somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
Yeah, it's about 10, 15 years after that. So he's basically a young dwarf at this point. Because I'm pretty sure he starts in the 70s. So it's about old world time. And he gets married maybe a bit later, around about the late 2300s. Loosely, Gotrek was an engineer.
Yep, and
that's something that's often forgotten. He was an engineer.
A very good one, too.
And a good one, too, yeah. And he was born down in Karazakarak, as I recall.
Yes, though that's one of the actual few kind of retcons-ish,
Yeah.
because if you go back to some of the older novels, it's kind of implied that he may have lived or was around Carrick 8 Peaks.
Carrick 8 Peaks.
But then as they changed the lore of Carrick 8 Peaks to make it where nobody was living there until the time of Belagar, obviously they had to change where Gotrek was, so they shifted his story to being in Karazakarak instead.
Mm-hmm. So Karazakarak, he was an engineer, and he gets into a bit of trouble. But after, he gets married, and he has a kid. Oh, what's her name? Can you remember her name?
Not off the top of my head, even though he does bring it up.
Garna. It's Garna. It's Garna.
There you go.
Garna.
Wow.
Garna. It's Garna.
Like
I'm pretty sure it's Garna. Yeah, it just came out of nowhere. So yeah, he's getting married. He has a kid, and everything's going pretty well for him. Imagine that lovely life that he's leading. Pre-Slayer days. He doesn't have that big, huge, massive knot. Instead, he's got a big, long beard. His hair's hanging down. He's just a happy dwarf. But it's about to go very wrong.
Yep. And to be, as an engineer, he accomplished some impressive things. Like someone brought up in chat, he helped build a King's Vault over in Balakvar. He worked a lot with various war machines. He worked on little bits of repairing the underway. Like he had lots of great experience. And then he fell in with the wrong crowd. And by the wrong crowd, I mean the horribly ill-fated Malachi Moccasin, which is sad because Malachi, who's up in Karakadrin, according to some stories, but not all, it depends on which one you look at, comes to him and says, "Hey, I got a great idea. We should invent a really clever, bizarre train that if we coat it with proper runic materials, will make it immune to the awfulness of the Chaos Waste, and we can take this train up into the Chaos Waste, and we can search for the fallen hold of Karak Doom." And Gotrek goes, "All right, bet." And a number of others join up, like someone by the name of, I think this is when Snorri joins them as well, if memory serves. You're all good.
Sorry. Dying in the corner, being old and croaky.
Yeah, but so they make this amazing device, and to be fair, it works. Like it does successfully repel like the warpstone dust and the horribleness of the Chaos Waste. But the problem is Malachi and Gotrek and all of them grossly underestimated how dangerous the Chaos Wastes were, because this giant runic train is attracting all kinds of problems, where all of these Chaos Warbands start attacking them, and they start just getting bogged down just due to attrition. There are so many monsters and creatures just relentlessly attacking them, which is why Malachi will go on to invent an airship, because an airship removes the problem of traveling along the ground, which is what ends up dooming this expedition, where the train is irreparably damaged in the Chaos Waste. So they have to abandon it, and everybody is basically scattered and having to fight for their lives, and most of them die, and it's horrible. This is why Snorri gets separated, Gotrek gets separated, Malachi. It's not exactly clear if this is what causes him to take the Slayer Oath, but you could imply that it is. This was a horrible failure. And Gotrek actually discovers his axe during this little moment because he wanders into a cave to escape from the storms that are stripping the chaos waste. They could flay the flesh off your bones. It's full of warpstone dust, so you can mutate if you're not careful. And he manages to stumble into a cave where he finds a strange little dwarf corpse and an axe. And he takes it. Because at least some dwarf should have it. And he starts to make his way home. And this is when a problem happens. Because the thing is that Gotrek, in his little quest to get this axe, though the exact events of this are a little nebulous, but Gotrek, in this little side quest, he doesn't make it home first. Snorri does. And the problem with Snorri is that even before this whole little trip, Snorri is an alcoholic, which a lot of people don't think dwarves can be alcoholics. They can. Big time. If you ever played The Enemy Within, literally the first dwarf NPC you meet is an alcoholic. And it's really tragic when you have a dwarf alcoholic. It's bad. It's really bad. And Snorri, after the failure of this, a lot of the people he worked with and were friends with all died. God knows what horrible monstrosities and tragedies and traumas they witnessed in the fucking chaos waste. But Snorri makes it home to the regions around Karak before anyone else, and he's wasted and is desperate for more to drink and forget about. Because that's the problem with Snorri. Snorri drinks to forget. That is his character trait. And it's a really horrible character trait. That's very, very sad. Like, he's lovable and he's an affable oaf, but he's drinking to forget trauma, which, for the love of God, do not use alcohol to deal with trauma. It is a really bad combination that's super fucking dangerous. Please get help if that's something you have experienced in any way, shape, or form. But Snorri comes across a group of dwarfs who are in a hurry because they are scouts. They're rangers, and they have witnessed that there is there's a goblin warband heading directly for some of the areas surrounding Karasakarak, and their job is to go warn people. But they run into Snorri Nosebiter, and a fight ensues because Snorri realizes they have alcohol. They refuse to give him any because they can tell he's completely wasted, and they're like, just bring this guy with us. And Snorri attacks them. And he knocks them out, and all that happens. And so there's no warning. And what happens, where the goblins show up on a bunch of dwarf outskirt areas, because not all dwarves live under the mountain. Many of them have farms where they get really important materials because they live up in kind of hidden places along the mountains. But greenskins are crafty little shits, especially goblins. And these goblins find their way to a particular, I don't know if village is the proper term, but kind of the equivalent of a village. And
Settlement.
Yeah, and they do what goblins do best, where they burn and pillage everything and they kill everyone. And Gotrek finally makes it home. He's traveled across almost the entirety of the World's Edge, half at least of the World's Edge Mountains. It's a long fucking trip by himself, and he makes it home to find everything in ashes, and he finds his wife and his daughter have been murdered.
Yep.
And the thing is that Gotrek is a dwarf, and he's pissed. He suffered a horrible tragedy that, honestly, the Slayer Oath might have already been kind of lingering in his mind for how bad the engineering trip went. And he comes back to find his family dead, and it just pushes him over the edge. It's too much. And he makes his way to the Thane, who was responsible for this area, because the Thane's job is to make sure that he has good informants, good scouts, good everything, and to protect the people of his little, community. And Gotrek walks up to him and accuses him of failing his job, even though the Thane knows he didn't. He set scouts, he set rangers, he did his job. And if you've ever seen a dwarf that you walk up to and you accuse them of violating their oaths of kingship, essentially, that's going to cause a problem. And a fight breaks out because they just start screaming at each other. And Gotrek does literally the most unforgivable thing you can do as a dwarf, which is that in front of all these other dwarfs, he murders the Thane.
Yep.
Probably with that axe.
kinslaying.
Yeah, so Gotrek becomes a kinslayer, which is quite literally the absolute worst possible crime as a dwarf.
Yeah, so do consider yourself sitting wherever you happen to be sitting just now, whether it is exercising away somewhere as you listen to us in your headphones, or perhaps you're in a car as we warble away, or maybe you're sitting in front of your laptop. Take a moment to just pause and think, what is the greatest crime that you can consider? What, in your mind, is the absolute worst? For dwarfs, this has just occurred. You can understand why Gotrek Gurnison is not going to be continuing on without the Slayer Oath. Not only that, you can also understand why he is vilified by many for what he has done. It is an absolutely unforgivable crime. Just take a moment for the great hero that is Gotrek and let it sink in for what he thinks of himself and what other dwarves think of him in turn, because this is not a quiet event. Everybody is aware of it locally, and it spreads because he is a known quantity. He has already been around the Caracrancor. He has been up and down trying to sort out crazy trains. He has been fixing parts of the old Emperor, attempting to, in many respects, bring back exactly what Thorgrim Grudgebearer believes that Caracrancor can become. He is not exactly a key component of that, but he is most certainly a component. He is a cog in the machine. And that particular cog hasn't just broken, it bloody blew up.
Yeah. And the thing that's horrifying to consider is that the Gurnison clan is not implied to be a tiny one. Gotrek likely had living relatives that, he took the Slayer Oath and had to leave behind. But, like, he's a known individual among the dwarfs. Like, it's very strongly flat out stated. High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer knew Gotrek before this fall. Like, this is not just some random dwarf took a Slayer Oath. This was like a well-known figure across multiple holds, just disgraced almost the entirety of the Caracrancor in one fell swoop.
Mm-hmm. And his grief. Sad story.
Yeah. So that's Gotrek, and leads to, and you have to remember, Gotrek doesn't meet Felix for like over a century. Like, he travels by himself for decades trying to find death, and he just can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you have to remember, when you're thinking about Gotrek's death and why he gets so upset, like, you read any Gotrek and Felix book, and every author pretty much does a very good job of, whenever Gotrek wins, he gets incredibly depressed. And you have to remember that from a dwarf perspective, what they basically believe will happen is that if Gotrek can successfully die against a big, horrible beastly remember, he has to be pushed to his absolute limit. It can't just be a stupid death. It can't be a reckless death. Yeah. Yeah. Dumb ways to die. Yeah. He has to die a fairly specific way. Every time he survives, what was dangling in front of him was not forgiveness, but the smoothing over of his crimes, his family getting to rest, and him getting to see his family again, because he would get to go to the Hall of the Ancestors. He would get to be with his wife and daughter again, if he can do this. But if he does not die correctly, he will never see them again. Like, that is a really upsetting dilemma to have thrown at your feet. And he's chasing that. And the horrible thing is, even in Age of Sigmar, like, basically billions of years later, millions of years later, however long it's been, he's still kind of chasing it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Gotrek is a sad figure. And it's easy to forget that when you focus on all the extraordinary things that he's done. But he is a slayer. And that means that he has to do his absolute damnedest to stay alive, even though he desperately wants to die. He has to do everything within his power to keep going. And he does. And he does. And he does. And he does. And it is, for him, absolutely heartbreaking. And that's why Felix, in many respects, is a figure, for him at least, that is both an absolutely welcome companion in this horror show that is his life. Not just a welcome companion, a brother in arms. But he also represents something that Gotrek does not believe that he deserves. And that is almost some form of absolution. Friendship. He doesn't deserve it. He is the worst. He took the oath because he's the worst. But Felix, nevertheless, doggedly stays on. And it massively hurts him that he does, while simultaneously provides great comfort. It's a complex relationship that I really love because of that.
Yeah, one of the things you'll see a lot, especially in Bill King's writing, yeah, my voice, which is phenomenal. I know we're struggling. We're almost there.
Yeah, I'm struggling. But coughing away in the background. I do apologize, everyone.
No, you're all good. So one of the things that Bill King does really well, and many of the later authors do as well, is that you'll often get moments where Felix manages to make a crack in Gotrek's like stern persona, and has a moment where he has like a genuine heart-to-heart with Gotrek, or he says something that makes Gotrek laugh, or he brings light to Gotrek life, and Gotrek realizes what just happened, and his mood just sours, and he just goes into a really black depression, because he has that moment of, oh man, I'm feeling a little better, and then there's a part of his brain that goes, how dare you feel a little bit better? You do not deserve to feel a little bit better. Like Andy said, you're the fucking worst. Like, as long as you're alive, you deserve to suffer and suffer alone. And that is like that eternal dilemma where, like, if you're reading the books, especially, it can be a little hard sometimes to be like, why is Gotrek always pushing Felix away? And it's because Gotrek has this very strong cultural belief that he is supposed to be suffering as a slayer.
And the problem is that he's friends. In fact, he's more than friends. He loves Felix, and Felix brings comfort. He's his mate, and that is something he doesn't deserve. And sometimes when the black moods hit, he'll do whatever it takes to get rid of him. And then, in turn, is enormously happy that he's there, because without him, well, what is there? And it's this lovely dichotomy of feelings that he's working his way through. It's great. I love it.
Yeah. And speaking of Felix, like, the thing that's critical to realize about Felix is that not only is Felix just kind of this amazing guy, like, honestly, like, he's objectively a good human being. He's hilariously, hopelessly romantic, which is very tragic. That is Felix tragedy, is that Felix likes to fall in love, and then terrible things happen to the people he falls in love with.
Every time. Oh no.
And it's often because of his relationship with Gotrek. And he knows that, which is kind of the even more horrible thing, is he keeps sticking by Gotrek even knowing what it means. But the thing that Felix does that from an outside perspective is so fascinating is that Gotrek would have many times successfully accomplished his doom if it wasn't for Felix. Because Felix is a fucking terrible rememberer, because he keeps saving Gotrek's life. And like to the point where he like often will convince Gotrek not to throw his life away, because Felix will say something along the lines, Gotrek will be like, this is it. This is the moment where I'm finally going to fight this horrible thing and I'm going to die. And Felix goes, or you live for now, because they're going to do this horrible thing, which would then be kind of our fault, which is bad. But if we run away right now, it'll be an even bigger and better fight later. Like, think of the story I'm going to tell about you, the saga I'm going to tell about you. It has to end perfectly, right? So this isn't the perfect death. We need to go do this other thing. Then you get the perfect death. And the thing is that Gotrek knows what Felix is trying to do. He's not stupid. He knows what Felix is trying to do. Felix is just trying to save his life. And the thing is that Gotrek knows deep down, as a slayer, he shouldn't do what Felix is suggesting, ever.
No, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
I think there's actually an undercurrent of sometimes Felix is right. And by that, I mean, this thing that you're about to throw your life away against, you're going to lose. This isn't going to be an honorable death. That you need to go for an honorable death, where it actually makes a difference. This one won't make the difference that you could make. Do you want to have a proper honorable death or not? Sometimes Felix is right. And if anything, that makes it worse because there's a part of him that just yearns for it. And some slayers are just not great slayers. They do throw their lives away in their ridiculous fashion. And as Gotrek's story builds and his saga becomes more important, the end becomes, if anything, a more important cap piece as well. So, yeah, sometimes Felix is right. And I'd say it's a bit more complicated than just simply,
that's fair.
I would have died if it weren't for you, Felix. That's often nothing more than an excuse.
Yeah. That being said, there are also times where Gotrek is about to die, and it would have been a fair death.
Yeah.
This would be it. This would be the moment. And then Felix gets involved and saves him.
Yep.
Probably the most famous case being Demon Slayer. Gotrek was about to die against that bloodthirster. Like, undeniably, death was finally here. And Felix not only saves him, but does the impossible to save him by picking up that damn hammer. Which kind of goes to show that there are probably forces that did not want Gotrek to die because they had plans for him, which is an idea that Gotrek knows about and is deeply uncomfortable with.
I think there's also I think there's also an aspect that that's what Gotrek wants.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
I think it's and that's why he's so easy to persuade around for someone who's utterly stubborn.
He'll never
by
admit
Felix.
it, but
because of the great nature of his crime, he really wants to do something astonishing. Felix is onto a good line with Gotrek on that regard. Quite clearly, Gotrek wants to go out in such a way that makes an enormous impact that will redeem him for everything that he's done wrong. In many respects, he is almost replicating Grimner himself. Grimner, who quite clearly had done something absolutely terrible and wished to redeem himself, probably kinslaying too, because of the very nature of the way they mirror each other, right to the very end. And that means that I think, relatively loosely, Gotrek is just doing it to himself. And every time he blames Felix, all he's really doing is blaming himself for not having the courage, in some respects, to simply say that he's the one who's responsible for doing it. It's much easier to grumble about someone else and basically say, yeah.
I think there's also an element as well where Gotrek, once again, would never want to admit it, but I think there's a part of Gotrek that so much loves Felix that he doesn't want to leave Felix behind. Like, he doesn't want to die, which is horrible. Like, as a Slayer, that should not be something you're thinking, is that you don't want to die. But, like, I don't think he does. Well, there's a part of him that doesn't. And I think that bothers him deeply.
Yeah, well, he's kind of becoming Grimner one way or another.
Yeah. And Grimner's unfortunately in a very similar boat.
Yeah.
But so those really and truly are a lot of the major beats. Felix is a character that you can get a lot of info out of, like, following his love stories. Those are kind of like the primary, like, struggles for him. You do, of course, they're actually one of the things that Nathan Long did that I really liked. Like, a lot of people give Nathan Long a lot of shit, but he did a lot of really cool things. And Nathan Long, like, one of my favorite bits is how he handles Felix's relationship with his family, where Felix comes from a family of merchants and burgermeisters, and his father is kind of downright abusive, not like physically abusive, but he's very emotionally abusive. And Nathan Long's writing of how complicated Felix's feelings are towards his father is fucking brilliant, as far as I'm concerned. Where, like, he loves his dad, even though he realizes his dad was not necessarily a great guy. And did a lot of kind of horrible shit and did not treat him well. But, like, when he finds out, like, Thanquol kills his dad, Felix, like, funny enough, that's the thing that actually gets Thanquol on Gotrek and Felix's shit list. Of all the things, one of the most hilarious scenes in the series, one of my favorite scenes in Elfslayer, is when Gotrek and Felix meet up with Thanquol again, which they haven't seen him for like 25 plus years or whatever. Thanquol has this whole speech about, like, I finally caught you. I finally captured you. Revenge will be mine. He's going on. And Felix and Gotrek finally go, who are you? And Thanquol's like, no, this can't be happening. You can't not know who I am. I'm Thanquol. You've been ruining my life for like 30 years at this point. And there's this whole moment where Thanquil's like explaining to them everything he's ever done to try and get them to remember who he is. And they're finally like, wait, that random guy from Nuln? Like, you're still alive? Thanquil's so angry because they ruin his moment, which is just great. Like, it's so fucking funny. But then he's able to stick the dagger and twist it when he literally shows Felix his father's ring and is like, well, hey, I murdered your fucking dad, dude. And Felix is like, you bitch. And like, that is when their relationship becomes something much, much deeper. Which is, I love how Nathan Long handles that. If you go from a moment of pure comedy to one of like, holy shit, like there's actual real consequences here.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I find Nathan does quite well, because Nathan understands the importance of contrasts to really drive home the horror. The comedy is required. And by making something light, it makes the darker so much darker. If the whole meeting had been dark, it would have just been one extra piece of darkness, and it wouldn't have felt as impactful. But it was like, oh, this is really quite learning. This is really quite, holy shit! And that immediate contrast change drives it home. Yeah, I love that bit.
Yeah, Nathan Long, I do think Nathan Long's points in the series, that not including the insanity that David Gaiman had to wrap up, which we'll talk about in a moment. Nathan Long's books, I think, are honestly the best when it comes to just pure tragedy. Like, just horrible shit happens. Of like in Orc Slayer, he introduces you to some characters that are awesome, and you're like, oh wow, these are dwarf characters we're gonna get to see for a long time. And then the actual end of the book happens, and it's horrible.
Oh no.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is genuinely awful.
Yeah.
Like Nathan Long is one of the only authors I know of who puts you in a moment where he goes, yeah, what happens if you put dwarfs in a situation where they have to do kinslaying? Because it's literally the only choice they have. Wouldn't that suck? You're like, why, Nathan? Why?
Just broadly speaking, his work generally does take, these are the known situations, and then he asks questions of them, which is one of the great things that good writers do. They say, well, if the world is like this, what happens when an impossible question is asked of that? And that is something that pops up again and again throughout the course of his work. And I rather enjoy it for that and that alone. He's got a masterful way of presenting impossible situations and then watching them explode.
Yeah, I will say for like the final books, because Games Workshop, if you don't own the Gotrek and Felix books, they can be kind of difficult to find, though you actually will probably have more luck than you think at like book resellers.
Yeah,
but there are many different forms of them, because back in the day, they used to just release them as individual novels, which have these really beautiful cover arts. Andy's got some behind him. But they also have re-released them many times, where they'll release them as individual books with new art, or in the case of these, for people that were collectors, they did the Chronicle series, where they just released them as omnibuy, and they just put all of them together. So there are 6 omnibuy, but I believe right now they're not in print, but they will come back into print inevitably. So like, they are not books I would pay like hundreds of dollars to try and get copies of.
No.
Just wait. But they're in audiobooks as well now and everything. But the for the Chronicles, which kind of put everything together, the next big author you get is Josh Reynolds. Josh Reynolds does kind of purely anthology. He doesn't get to do any kind of the mainline books, but his books are fun. They're very battle heavy, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. And you get some really fun what if situations. Probably the best book that he wrote was Road of Skulls. Because you get like Chaos Dwarfs interacting with Gotrek and Felix. And what does Gotrek feel about Chaos Dwarfs? Which is kind of what you would expect, but dialed up to 11, because they're the Forge World Chaos Dwarfs as well. And you also get to see them interact with Ungrim Iron Fist, which is really fun, and Garagrim Iron Fist. So you get to see some really fun little bits there. You also get to meet like Ungrim's wife, who hilariously is named Kemma, which is also the name of Belagar Ironhammer's wife, because for some reason all the royal wife dwarfs are Kemmas for some reason. But that book is super fun. But so he does a lot of kind of the fun side stories that I recommend, but they're not pivotal to like the overall narrative. And then David Gaimer, who got one of the most horrifying, anxiety-inducing jobs like I've seen him talk in interviews, and I've had the chance to speak with him myself. But like the amount of anxiety of, hey, here's Gotrek and Felix, which by this point had been running for about 30 years, 35 years.
90, 10, yeah, about that. About 30
Yeah.
years.
And he got given the job of finishing it in 2 books.
25. About 25.
Yeah, 20.
15.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll check the date while you're...
Yeah. Well, it would have been like
25 years, 26 years.
Okay, yeah. So, but like horrifying job for any author, especially when like he hadn't got, like he had written a little bit of Gotrek and Felix before that point, but not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I think he did a marvelous job wrapping it up. Like, his characterization of Throg is fucking wonderful. Like, that became the Throg, the Troll King. To the point where, like, when his character got changed for Total War, that's like one of the biggest criticisms of Total War that people are constantly asking them to redo, is to make him more consistent with his, where when Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition took the character for Sea of Claws, they used David Geimer's version, not the Total War version. Because David Geimer's version is fantastic, where you have this troll who's a very genuinely deep-thinking character who is so fascinating when Gotrek encounters him, of a troll who is not necessarily evil, and what that does to dwarfs, like the conversation there. But Kinslayer is also where David Geimer goes, how do I wrap up this story? Because one of the things about Gotrek and Felix is that Gotrek is very heavily obfuscated from the reader the entire series. Like, no author ever even gets close to trying to tell you what Gotrek did. There are other characters that know, and Gotrek knows, but Felix is never allowed to know because the reader's not allowed to know, because they want you to just imagine it. And they never tell you any of that. They keep a lot of that very, very secret. All of the Slayer characters, they never tell you what any of the Slayer characters did.
Rightly so.
Which is correct, because we know what Felix knows, you know, and occasionally we get like a villain chapter, but most of the time our knowledge is limited to Felix's knowledge. And, you know, a proper dwarf slayer would not talk about their oath. But of course, when you're at the end, it's the end. Now is the time, you know, it's time to reveal it. And his version of making it where Snorri Nosebiter is responsible, but Gotrek doesn't find out until Kinslayer. And the reason the book's called Kinslayer is because it has kinslaying. And like, of all the things David Geimer could have done to make it where it's like, hey, this is the end of the world, this is the apocalypse, is Gotrek killing Snorri Nosebiter. And
there's a big, huge spoiler for you.
It's fucking, I cried like a bitch reading that book. Yeah, it's awful. It, like, the fight is awful. Because Snorri is the one egging Gotrek on. Because for Snorri, being killed by Gotrek is a worthy end for him in a sense. And it's also Gotrek avenging what Snorri did, which is from dwarf culture proper. And Felix the whole time is going, like, trying to stop them. And he can't. Like, this is literally what makes Kinslayer so horrible and so unique, is it really is one of the only times where Felix is trying to stop Gotrek from doing something and he fails.
Yep.
Which to me is really the indication that it's the end of the world.
Yep. All of that.
And it's tragic as fuck. And then you have Slayer, which of course gives David Geimer answers the ultimate question of, how the fuck do I make them fight something that is the final book? And he goes, oh, Be'lakor, of course.
It was Be'lakor all along.
Yeah.
It is right there.
And of course, because to put it hilarious how overpowered Gotrek and Felix are at this point, Be'lakor gets his ass handed to him almost immediately, and has to rely on summoning 4 greater demons to help deal with Gotrek and Felix. Where
that's proper Anarian level nonsense.
Yeah, where Gotrek is fighting the same Bloodthirster from Demon Slayer, which is an awesome callback, because the final moment in Demon Slayer is that demon saying that he's going to come back for them one day. So you get the same Bloodthirster comes back, the same Keeper of Secrets from Elf Slayer comes back, And then it's like a new Lord of Change and a new Great Unclean One that Felix is trying to help deal with. And it's insane. Like, you get Grimnir shows up, and you get, like, Gotrek fights Grimnir, which also goes to show how fucking absurd Grimnir is, because he beats Gotrek in literally about a millisecond. Like, he literally just fucking kills him. Like, it's not even a fight. And this is after Gotrek has defeated a Bloodthirster, a Be'lakor, all this shit. He's like, Gotrek, fight me. And Grimnir just fucking obliterates him. But then he brings him back to life, because Gotrek gets given his doom.
Mm-hmm.
And his doom, and Grimnir sells it to him very well, is the ultimate doom, which is that he will literally inherit Grimnir's doom.
Yep.
To take up both of Grimnir's axes and go into the realm of chaos itself and hold the tide. Which means that, like, Gotrek, as far as the dwarves, if you really think about it, when it comes to the dwarves' contribution of averting the end times, they did their job, which is that Gotrek holds the gate.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the other Council of Incarnates fail their portion of holding it up. But, like, Gotrek, if it weren't for Age of Sigmar obviously having to change a couple things, this is where Gotrek dies.
Yeah, and I really dislike that this isn't the end. Now, obviously, more cool stories to tell, and they're pretty cool in their own right, and that's cool. But that doesn't change the fact that they have undermined a really nice end. The entire series of Gotrek and Felix was polished off in a way that I felt was suitably over the top, called back to pretty much the entire series through the course of the couple of books that give us Gotrek's final doom, and speak to what everybody knew all along, that he was going to be basically Grimnir. It was the end of the story that was started in the 4th edition Dwarf Army List, when they dropped in Gotrek and gave him his doom there, and went, wait a minute, that axe is definitely Grimnir's axe, isn't it? It pretty much frickin' is. They called it out all the way back in 1993. It had already been sown in terms of its seeds at that point, and they finished it in 2016, and finished it in a style that didn't do what a lot of fantasy authors do, which is, well, I think everybody might have guessed the end, so I'm going to undermine their expectations. It did the opposite. It did exactly what everybody expected, and it was awful, and it was brilliant, and it really did finish the story perfectly. And even though it was finished, there were so many gaps left behind that should they ever return to the Warhammer world, there is still tons of space for them to fill in if they wish to do so. And I know I haven't done my call out, so let's do it now. My call out to Michael Moorcock. Michael Moorcock, who did largely exactly the same thing with his most popular character, and brought it to an end. And how that character ended, I'm not going to spoil which one, but has gone back and written in a host of stories between the start of that character and the death of that character at the end of it. And this was set up beautifully. The end was telegraphed. Everybody went, this is going to end, isn't it? This is going to end. But we were still on the edge of our seats right to the last pages, and you're like, holy shit, it happened. Holy shit, it happened. And it did. And it was great. It was one of those rare circumstances where Games Workshop told a mighty anthology story and kind of paid it off by the end. It was good. It was great.
It's what we wish the entire end times had been, where it took all of the narratives that had built up across 20 plus years and tied them all very nicely up in a bow. All the characters you know and love show up, and all of them, with like one exception, die in the books.
And it's tragic as fuck, and it's brilliant because of that. And in some respects, because it was kind of great, thanks David Geimer, it made the rest of the end times look absolute bobbing.
Oh, yeah, ass by comparison.
By comparison, it was just bad. And no matter how much individual parts of the end times may redeem those individual parts, the overall story was terrible. And it missed out on pretty much everything that should have been the end of Warhammer. Gotrek and Felix doesn't. Gotrek and Felix starts with a bunch of tiny little heroes who are a bit rubbish, much like you would start your own Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventure. It was a troll slayer and it was a young human agitator. The pair of them went off on adventures and they found all manner of crazy shit. They got themselves caught up with all manner of crazy stuff. They meet half of the well, not half, but they certainly meet many of the core characters that are Warhammer characters. They defeat everything from the biggest thing down to the smallest thing until eventually they reach the end and everybody dies. A great sacrifice is made and we come to a conclusion. It was a great story. And there's a reason that Gotrek and Felix is so popular. It's because they did their job with those characters. Now, lots of different authors were involved, and some authors did it better than others, but that doesn't really matter if we look at the overall arc. The overall arc was nailed down. Could it be better? Sure. There's lots of things we can always...
Yeah, I mean, everything could be better.
Yeah, totally. And you know, we love to complain about shit. But given what they had and what they did, this is one of the examples where I'll put my hand up and say, and I've been desperately trying to avoid spoilers all the way through, I think they nailed it. And I do not regret anything that was done with it. I do regret what happens next. And for all, David Geimer was employed to do a job, and he almost certainly probably did a good job. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Because it almost undermines all of the sacrifices that were made to make that story so great. It almost makes that story not good anymore. And obviously it doesn't.
Yeah, I will respectfully disagree. Only because I think David Geimer did a very good job in his books of explaining why it's different now. Like there's a really beautiful line, I think it's Blood of the Old World, where Gotrek quite literally says something to the effect of that, like, he did die. Like, Slayer that is the death of Gotrek.
Yeah.
And what you're dealing with in Age of Sigmar is just someone different that has the same memories, but Gotrek...
Two eyes.
Yeah, what's fast? Well, he loses one of them in the very quickly, but
for what? No, 2 eyes.
Though instead of taking a goblin to the face, he takes a fucking purple sun to the face. But
that's a slightly different thing.
Yeah, just a little. But one of the things that's beautiful about it is that Gotrek considers his Slayer oath over because he died, which is the way it should have been. Like, that is him fulfilling the Slayer oath, which is the way that Gotrek and Felix ends. Gotrek is just something different in Age of Sigmar, like because it's the Gotrek series. It's not the Gotrek.
I get that. Series. I nevertheless still don't like it.
Oh yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah, I get it. Totally fair. Yeah, nah. I could even see Gotrek going, no, fuck that. Slayer oath.
Yeah. To be fair, Gotrek also hates the new Gotrek series, so it works great.
So we're okay there.
Yeah. Like. The best way I always describe the series is Gotrek is literally a fantasy fan stuck in AOS. He fucking hates it, and it's brilliant. It's what makes it that almost all of the comedy is from Gotrek being an old worlder in AOS, to the point that he literally refuses to use the word Dwarden. He always says dwarfs, and if anyone calls him a Dwarden, he's like, well, yeah, of course they don't call themselves dwarfs. They don't deserve to be called dwarfs. Fucking weirdos. Anyway, so we're gonna blow through a bunch of questions really, really fast, and
we'll probably check the super chats first.
Oh yes, let's do that first, and then we'll blow through
what
questions we have time for.
While you're checking those, I'll see if there's any.
Meant to say elves. In Dark Elves. Into this. Speaking of Chaos Wars, I love when Teclis snapped at Gotrek about them when he said all dwarfs are the same, and a fight nearly breaks out. Yes. Giant Slayer by Bill King is where it has Teclis featured as a main character. And it's one of the only times you really get to enjoy a elf character and a dwarf character who are big characters stuck in a room together, and they fucking hate each other. And it's great.
Agreed.
Like,
it's great.
Yeah. Where you have a high elf acting like a high elf, and you have a dwarf who's not taking any of his shit. But the high elf is also not taking any of his shit. And it's great. It's wonderful. And I think if you're ever role-playing in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and you have a dwarf and an elf in the same party and you're like, how do we get along while also antagonizing each other? Read Giant Slayer. It's a perfect example of you're working towards the same goal, but you don't have to like each other. Czar94, first Warhammer book I ever read was Gotrek Felix, the Serpent Queen. Still one of my favorites. I love that it introduced me to the series. Yeah, and I can see you still have Kalita artwork, so I can tell it had an effect on you.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I'd just like to call out that is one of the things that I enjoy most about Gotrek and Felix, is that so many different people started in different places, and because of that have very different ideas as to what Gotrek and Felix should be. I have spoken to many people over time who have started on the later books, gone back to the first one, and just been left with huge question marks over their head and giant what the fucks. I just don't get it. And equally, those who started on the first books and then come to the later ones, and they're left with giant question marks over their head going, what the fucks? Because the series spans Warhammer and also spans Warhammer in its tone, and that's super fun.
Yep. Hammett, so Gotrek before Slayer's Fresh Prince Will Smith, Slayer Gotrek is post-slap. Oh, no.
Wow.
That's an analogy. Aaron Shriver, sickness is for humans and elves.
And elves.
Favorite Gotrek quote.
And elves.
Yeah, one of the Gotrek and Felix is also one of the best series that demonstrates that dwarfs are not just short humans. They're just different. They're a different species. Like Felix hammers that home so well because of Bill King's writing and because of like all the writing of the other stuff afterwards, where they're just not the same. They're just not the same. We're like, it's hilarious though that elves traditionally really don't get sick, but a dwarf is like, I don't care. Yeah, Viper Wolf. Yeah, that's an amazing quote. Yeah, your people are too soft and yours are too tough. Yeah.
Good line.
Phil, seeing Gotrek rage at all the magical elements of Age of Sigmar world is hilarious, but can you imagine how horrible Age of Sigmar would be for an old world dwarf? Yeah, oh yeah, he hates it very much, and he should, because from everything he understands, it's a mess. Yep. Linda, if the last two books had ignored the end times and wrapped the series up in their own timeline, what last enemy would y'all have had to be Gotrek's last foe? So what's interesting, I don't know if this is 100% true. I'm curious if Andy can actually add some thought to this. I've read an interview about like Bill King and stuff, where apparently his original planned end for Gotrek was he wanted him to die fighting Malekith. Though Malekith apparently wins, it was to tie into the legacy that Malekith, of course, has with the dwarves. But that was the like planned end. And of course, like Games Workshop Black Library were like, no, you can't kill Gotrek. He's too important. But that was his original scheduled end, which I don't think is a bad one.
Yeah, I read the same. And I think that Bill would have been the right person to write that. Would have been great. Because he's got a good grasp of them. It's not what I would have done, given where the character ended up and what they were doing, and given what was clearly telegraphed with Grimnir. I would have probably taken them up to the actual Northern Gate. I mean, that is loosely what the original train was off to do anyway. So I would be looking, I mean, it wasn't kind of Doom, whatever. But regardless, I'd be heading them up towards the Northern Gate and polishing off that particular story. It was always a bit odd in David Geimer's book where Grimnir's at the third gate.
Yeah.
What fucking gate is that?
Yeah, fucking David Geimer sitting there going, okay, so the end times is happening in the Empire. How do I wrap this up in the Empire? Chaos Gate, the Empire.
There's just a Chaos Gate in the Empire. It was a bit of a bullshit line, and I would have liked to have seen him end in the North, because I think that would have been the obvious choice for him. I think if the end as Geimer had written it had never been written and I hadn't been aware of it, I would have expected that to be the end. I remember when I first read that Malekith was a potential end, I was left with a frickin' seriously? There are better ends you could have. You'd write it well, and I know it would be great. But really, for Gotrek's doom seems like it is with chaos. And to be pitched against it. So that's probably what I would have done.
Let's see. Felix and Gotrek meet the old one and the assassins in Araby mentioned in Orc Slayer. Have the Araby assassins been confirmed anywhere else? I heard Felix had an affair with the old one's daughter, if I remember. That is a really fun kind of just like woo thing that happens in that book. Yeah, it's typical Games Workshop stuff where like a lot of the times the authors are kind of allowed to just throw in random bits, and if a lot of people seem like they like it, they might expand on it later. But other than that, it's just kind of a self-contained reference. Let's see. Gun for Bullets when Story remembers. Yep, it's horrible.
Gun for Bullets. Did you really need to say that?
Yep. Aaron, one of my favorite characters in the series is the Ugly Slayer in Dragon and Beast Slayer, and how sleazy he is. Yet in the end, he helps Gotrek kill the Chaos Champion and dies himself. Yeah, he literally, if I recall correctly, he kind of fucks up fate. Because the whole point in Beast Slayer is that you have this big Chaos Champion of Tzeentch who has these two twins who are awesome antagonists that like if you're reading the books, you don't expect them to be a not series long, but multi-book antagonists, but they are big fucking antagonists. And they are basically advising this Chaos Lord and telling him what's going to happen, telling him the future. And so he is dealing with Gotrek, knowing that Gotrek is a threat because of how Gotrek interacts with fate. And it's a random other Slayer who saves Gotrek, which pisses him off.
Yeah.
Like, he dies in the process, which, if anything, I mean, he's actually one of the very few Slayers. So one of the titles for Gotrek that's kind of funny is he's known as the Doom Cheater, because other Slayers tend to hate Gotrek because they know that if Gotrek's around, that means something really big might be about to happen, but it also means Gotrek's probably going to kill it, which means that you're not going to get your doom because Gotrek's going to kill the big, awesome, horrible thing that you were going to fight.
Doom Thief.
Yeah, Doom Thief. So a lot of Slayers hate Gotrek and avoid him because they don't want him stealing their dooms, which Gotrek finds very annoying. But this is actually, this particular character is actually one of the only characters who steals he's a Slayer that steals Gotrek's doom. Quite literally. Yeah, that's a great character. Yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Which, like, oof, yeah. I actually love that scene in retrospect because if I remember right, the way he literally gets the Chaos Champion is he basically like bear tackles the back of his knees, which causes him to like buckle and start falling backwards. And then he kills the Slayer, but because he's falling, he's not in a good position, and Gotrek hits him with the axe and he dies, which is so great. Like, the way he goes down is perfect. Viper Wolf. What makes me sad is Gotrek's view of the AOS dwarfs. Well, yeah, but to be fair, they're not dwarfs. They're Dwarden, they're different.
Yeah. I understand being sad about it, though.
I love how Felix went full Palpatine and Kinslayer. He wasn't Palpatine. It was Snorri, really, that was being Palpatine. Do it. To put you at ease, I am not the same Aaron. Oh, that
you're not the same. Oh, so you're an Aaron or an Aaron? Oh, no, I'm very confused.
Yep.
Thanks for confirming that, though. Super appreciated.
I used to be a Chaos Lord like you, but then I took a Bjornisson to the knee. Chaos Lord, probably. All right, so
did we get Mornington?
Oh no, we did. If Felix had somehow told the tales that was written in the books and Gotrek was able to read it, would Gotrek be happy with it? So Gotrek comments on Felix's writings a lot. He never reads them. But he knows they exist. But Felix is always terrified when Gotrek brings it up because he's worried that Gotrek is going to read it and he's going to hate it. But Gotrek refuses to read it and basically just takes it as, oh, good, you're fulfilling your side of your promise and you are telling my tale to many different people. Good.
I think come the end, let's say, for example, we're in an imaginary world where the actual end of Gotrek, as it occurred in the books, comes about. And in this imaginary world, Gotrek can sit down and read it afterwards. I think he would just weep.
Yeah, I think getting to see Felix's perspective on everything would be too much for him.
Yeah, he would just weep. His end, the potential reclaiming of his honor and what it means, his own death, his fate, doom, what Grimnir has done. Oh, Snorri, all of it. It would be horrific. What kinslaying, oh man, the whole thing is just
it would literally just be like a trauma dump.
Yeah, it would be super hard. So I think if he were somehow to be able to read it like that, would he be happy? Absolutely not. But would he be? Would his honor be resolved? I'm not sure Gotrek would ever accept that his honor was resolved if you were writing him the way he'd been written pretty much consistently. But upon reflection, he might be able to reach that point at some point, but I don't think he'd accept it to begin with. The fact that he was potentially even conscious would be enough. Oh.
Yep. All right, I'm just going to span through some of these until Andy tells me to shut up. Because we're technically...
Let's go quick then.
Yeah. Is Gotrek for a reason... possibly the descendant of an ancestor god. Technically, all dwarfs are, so that's not necessarily that big of a deal. Though there is the eternal question of what is it that's more special? Is it Gotrek or is it the axe? And I think the series actually does a pretty good job of never really giving you the full answer to that question.
Yeah, if someone else had found the axe, would they have been Gotrek, so to speak? And I think that the answer seems to be, well, Gotrek found the axe, so why are you asking the question?
Yep. Is he the oldest living Slayer? No. There are a couple, not a lot, but there are some Slayers that are older. I believe Ungrim Ironfist is also a bit older than Gotrek is.
Yeah, he is.
He is
a good bit older.
Yeah, though they do know each other really well. If you read Road of Skulls, you can find out about their relationship. It's actually really well written and is really fun. Ungrim loves and hates Gotrek very evenly, which is the way it should be between Slayers. Is Felix considered a dwarf friend? Depends on the author. Some authors say yes, some authors say no, but it should be yes.
It should be yes. It is no, but he is treated very well and considered by some dwarfs like he was a dwarf friend. He should frickin' be one.
Do you think Teclis and AOS would have a heart attack if he realized Gotrek was still around? No, I think Teclis would pity him. Because Teclis would probably have a little bit of a decent idea of what he is. And it would probably be sad, especially if he realized it was Gotrek without Felix. I think Teclis would be like, ooh, yikes. But I don't think Teclis would want to talk to him. I'll put it that way. Gotrek and Felix have killed at least one of every monster in the Warhammer world that I'm aware of. What monster gave them the most trouble? Definitely the Bloodthirster. Bloodthirster was by far the hardest fight they ever had. I guess unless like Be'lakor counts, but and like the final fight. But even then, like their power scaling was a lot more even. The Bloodthirster was like Gotrek was
massively outclassed.
Yeah, like it was a miracle he survived that fight.
Yeah, totally agreed entirely.
Like quite literally, it's literally a miracle. It's like a Deus Ex Machina, quite literally, that Gotrek survives.
Yep.
Hawk of the Night. If Gotrek and Felix visited Cathay, what special characters would you like to see them encounter? Definitely one of the Dragon Kids.
All of them.
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, really, all of them. But one of the probably, if I had to pick just one of them, for me, probably Zhao Ming. I think Zhao Ming would by far be the most entertaining, because he's the most human of the Dragon Children.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I think that would be hilarious. Is Gotrek's axe suitable for perma-killing demons? No. It's very good at destroying their physical forms and is very frustrating for them. But there are demons that have been killed by it and they come back later in the story.
Yeah, if you're looking for a god-killing weapon, that axe is not it.
Yeah. So if Grimnir used to have two axes, so Gotrek has one and Thorgrim has the other, where does that leave Grimnir? He's a god. You think he needs physical axes? He's a god. Yeah. Who's your favorite minor character in Gotrek and Felix? Mine might be the dwarf conspiracy theorist in Orc Slayer. That is a good one. Favorite little minor character? For me, as weird as it actually may sound... Oh, for me, you know what? It's probably Thanquol's assistant that gets all mutated. And becomes like... It causes a slave revolt in Hell Pit. And almost destroys the city of Hell Pit. That side character is very fun.
Yeah, it's quite fun.
Gotrek had some valuable objects of great sentimental value and gave it away to help restore a friend's tavern. Yep. What is that object? Where does the sentimental come from? Presumably it came from his past life. Or was a gift from someone very important to him, but it was gold, and he gave it to somebody to help rebuild their inn. But yeah, presumably it was like a bracelet gold thing.
Yeah, you get the feeling that it might be something that he was supposed to have got after, but in fact wasn't. As in, it was something he was holding on to, from the general tone of it. So I would suggest it was something from beforehand, and he shouldn't have had it in the first place.
Infiltrator Troy, why couldn't Felix and Ulrika make it work after she got the blood kiss? If you read the books, they explored that heavily. Yeah. It's not that they can't make it work. It's more that they choose not to because of certain dilemmas. Like Felix is really struggling with like feelings of disgust and terror because Ulrika's a vampire, and she's really struggling against the urges to not eat him. Because remember, she's not like Vlad is different. Because you bring up Vlad and Isabella, Vlad is thousands of years old and has a really good self-control over his desires and his compulsions. Ulrika's a baby vampire. It is very, very fucking hard to control themselves.
I think it's important to note pretty much all of that. And it's also important to note that Vlad, regardless of how he may have been portrayed in various parts, must have an extraordinary self-control or Isabella would be dead. So, yes.
Yeah. And plus there's like, you know, the eternal dilemmas of like, if you're dating an immortal, so you're getting older and they stay the same age and yada, yada, yada.
Although, let's be honest, Felix by the end.
They didn't know that though. They didn't know that, to be fair.
Felix by the end. I mean, really? You're not getting older, Felix. Yeah. I'm not.
Yeah. That it's so funny when that's pointed out to Felix. He's like, yeah, I am. And Max is like, no, you're not. Why is it Gotrek giving up his axe to some other person like a king in exchange for a worse weapon? Because that would be cheating. for slayers. Like making your weapon deliberately worse so you die easier. That means you're not trying your hardest.
Again, am I got mic issues? Hi, Lindsay.
Maybe I on my end, I'm not noticing anything weird, but I don't know if it going through StreamYard.
It might be. It might just be because it's you're louder than I am because of your setup. I'll check it out for next time to make sure it's resolved.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, we'll look into that.
Yeah.
We did. We're on a technically different platform in a sense. We're on different StreamYards than we have been on previously. Totally. So I don't know if that's changed anything.
So I'll go check my settings because maybe my settings are slightly different over there.
Yep.
Oh, well,
a lot.
Oh. Living Legend, thank you for confirming.
Yeah. So I don't know. Akuma King. A lot of people proclaim that not only could Gotrek have killed Archaon and prevent the end crimes, but that the dwarf could have whacked the whole traitor Primarchs during the Horus Heresy. Gotrek is literally only as powerful as the author makes him. There's a reason they don't tend to make him fight named characters.
I'm gonna say something that's controversial. I think Archaon would hand him his ass.
Oh no, I agree.
And I know that's controversial, particularly for Gotrek fans, and I'm somewhat of a Gotrek fan. But I'm not just talking about Warhammer stats here. I'm just talking about what Archaon is, what he represents, everything that he is. The whole, 4 Chaos Greater Demons, and me having a scrap with him, Gotrek is still not facing off against Archaon. Archaon is supposed to be the ultimate expression of the end times. And he is more than any of those greater demons that are largely working to his whim anyway. Archaon is special. Gotrek is special. Their fates were never meant to cross because ultimately they don't. So it's not really a question we need to moot because it never happens. But if they were, it's not how this Troll Slayer is meant to go. I think he would probably have his ass handed to him and they would be pushed back.
Hilariously, I will note, I do think Gotrek could have kicked the ass of Storm of Chaos Archaon with how he ended up being portrayed, which is what I think agreed
completely.
I think that's what a lot of people get caught up on is Storm of Chaos Archaon, but that's not the Archaon we get in
Grimgor, bath!
Yeah, it's like 8th edition Archaon and End Times Archaon is a completely different character.
Yeah, completely
different. And it's far more accurate to what he needs to be.
Yeah, I agreed. And in the same way that it's very easy to just look at Gotrek and say he kicked everyone else's ass because he has kicked everyone else's ass. But as was noted, Bill King would have said, Malekith would eat him. Yeah. In the same way that, Archaon is going to absolutely maul him in a way that Gotrek would probably both be absolutely appalled by and delighted. But I've got a feeling he would survive it. Because Gotrek's doom is to survive. So what would happen is Archaon would defeat him. He'd be left dead on the battlefield, but he would choke back to life. Something didn't occur the way it should do, and he would be gutted that he wasn't dead. That would be the most likely outcome to that particular scrap.
Yep. Also, would he kill the traitor Primarchs? Yeah, of course, easily. Gotrek would just dominate the Primarchs, no problem.
Easy.
Bunch of big man babies. Yeah, he put them in a can.
Man babies.
All right. Okay. I'm going to do like 2 or 3 more, and then we'll catch up with Super Chats, then we got to wrap up. Service in, do you think Franz would pardon Gotrek and Felix if he knew about even half of their achievements? Funny enough, Franz would probably be tempted to, but there would probably actually be some interesting political ramifications of trying to do that. Because inevitably you need them to be kind of hilarious outlaws on the run. I think the story would twist it away where Karl Franz would say, no, it's better for them to be like this for XYZ political reasons. And it would be kind of like skeevy.
Yeah, it's very easy for us to view Gotrek and Felix through the lens of the books, where they are the heroes. But from the perspective of the characters who are in that setting, they are proper mental. Gotrek is unreliable, massively so. He's a drunk. He gets out of his head. He's angry.
He fights a lot.
He lost all the time.
Random people.
He is not a good person to have around under any circumstance at all. He's a force of nature rather than necessarily being something you could ever rely upon. And Felix goes wherever he goes, generally with a wake of broken hearts in his past, half of which are dead as well. So, cut a long story short, they're not perceived as the good guys by many. It's very easy for us to perceive them that way because it's the books that we're reading and they're the very literal good guys in our book. But from the perspective of characters inside that setting, they are difficult.
Yeah, there's also the thing of if Karl Franz pardoned them, that would heavily imply to the general public that what's happening in the books is real, which would open up like a fucking mess of problems. Like Skaven Slayer is a published book in the Warhammer world, but it's like, oh, this is clearly just stupid drivel. Skaven aren't real. If Carl Friends is like, oh, these guys are great heroes and they've done all this crazy shit the books say, that would like be horrendous from like trying to keep lots of important information under taps type of situation. That would not be good. That would be very bad. What would happen? I'm gonna skip that because it's a goof question. All right, we're gonna catch up on super chats, and then we gotta go.
Sounds good. That came out croakier than expected.
Oh, no, okay. The last one I will say from Jiggy.
Sounds good. Yeah.
The last thing that I saw here that Jiggy asked, what were the known and recorded crimes of Gotrek and Felix? The biggest one is Gotrek quite literally murdered several of the Reichsguard, which is
he
kind of a
literally
big
slays
deal.
his way through them.
Yeah, like he butchers a regiment of Reichsguard. That is a huge crime.
Window tax riots. Woo! Not good. They are literal criminals.
Yeah, considering that Reichsguard, many of them are probably nobles. Like Gotrek,
all of them.
There's a good reason Karl Franz would definitely not ever pardon them.
What do you mean my best friends and guards have been killed by this dwarf? Hunt him down.
Yep. Also, like, oh yeah, all these families that support my rule and are critical to keeping these stabilized, yeah, they're gonna want the guy that murdered their sons.
Yeah.
Okay. So Gotrek, he does like it because he viewed it will draw people to him to fight. Ooh, I don't know what that's in reference to at this point, unfortunately.
Sorry, Aaron.
Sorry, Aaron.
Yeah.
Still loading. Good day, gentlemen. Had a bit much fun last night. Haha. Yeah, I'm still crippled from yesterday because I moved a house.
And apparently I've picked up something awful and I've been croaking all the way through the stream, and I do apologize to everyone out there for my croakiness.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. We're
just
both,
general quiet as I sit here shivering.
We're both having a great time, but me and Andy definitely like limped into the preloading lobby.
Oh yeah. And we were like, hi, how you doing? I'm doing great.
Felix X Miao Ying win, not Minor Ying. Oh no. Miao Ying. I will say Miao Ying, stupid autocorrect. Okay, thank you. Funny enough, I do think because of the way Felix is written, there probably would be a hilarious would be perfect for him of a hilarious scene of Miao Ying being like, you know what? I will take him as one of my concubines. And Felix being and trying to like get out of there.
That would happen. It's almost a done deal. It's already happened in my head canon as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, like one of the anthology stories, I think Josh Reynolds wrote it, that's particularly well known for being hilarious, is there's a story about Gotrek somehow getting in a situation where he basically promises to have Felix married to a halfling. That's an official book, and it's just the shenanigans of Gotrek and Felix trying to escape the moot. It's very funny.
Good times.
Big O Lamio, skeleton warriors, heirlooms of Nagash's powerful necromantic magic, or the unfortunate test subjects of an entirely too potent alchemical form of a Zempek. That is a really out there question. I don't know. That feels like that's a pharmaceutical drug that I am not super familiar with. But
that's exactly what it feels like to me too.
Thanks for the dollars. Sorry. Sam Alden, how do you feel about Vlad wanting to make an alliance with Throg against Chaos and Kinslayer? It makes perfect sense. Vlad is the perfect representation of a character that understands to defeat Chaos, you need all hands on deck. It doesn't matter how cruel or monstrous or whatever they are. If they're willing to fight Chaos, that's an ally, period.
I've just read Mornington Crescent's post. I'm bringing it up because it made me laugh.
Halfling lair? No!
You've killed me, Mornington.
No! Like, although we focused a lot on kind of the major tragedy elements, like the comedy of Gotrek and Felix is A+.
Yeah, it really is good.
It is a hysterical series a lot of the time, especially like the amount of times the authors poke fun at Felix kind of being known for sleeping around, but he hates that portrayal of himself. He likes to think of himself as very romantic and noble, but he's also a bit of a man-ho. and there's a lot of jokes at his expense.
Yeah, there is.
Aaron Straver, Felix's books, he viewed that will draw in fights. Oh, Gotrek, yeah. I think that's a potential way he could view them. All right, so we're all cut up. We got to get out of here before inevitably more stuff comes in, because although we appreciate the support, we're both exhausted.
Yeah. Thank you so much for putting up with my croakiness. It has been quite the stream for me. I enjoyed it immensely, though, because Gotrek and Felix are quite literally the best. And I think, for me, they represent Warhammer in a way that no other character does. Because all the other characters have either just stayed the same from when they were first created for, say, 4th edition Warhammer, and they've had extra bits added on, but they've not really changed. Or, alternatively, they've just been rewritten. Gotrek and Felix have this weird middle ground, where they started off as what amounts to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay characters. They were very low powered, they were very normal, they were very grounded, and through the course of it, the dial was slowly turned up and up until they moved from being fantasy roleplay characters into full-blown, massive Warhammer characters that were capable of taking on 4 greater demons at once, wiping their noses and saying what's next. And I think that very much speaks to the differences between what Warhammer was and what Warhammer became. These characters are representative of the changes in the Warhammer setting. And I find them fascinating because they are favourites of people who love the old stuff and also favourites of people who love the new stuff. And no matter what sort of player you are, there's something in there that makes you go, yeah, this is my Warhammer. And I think that is the great, and I do mean great draw of Gotrek and Felix, and that's that they appeal to almost everyone, and somehow they manage to drag people in and start making them like the other parts that they might not have known about to begin with. Say, for example, you like the newer Warhammer, you look back at the old one, you go, hey, that's pretty cool too. If you like the old one, you start reading the new stuff because you love those characters anyway, and you go, actually, these are epic and kind of awesome. Warhammer is not necessarily everything that I'd imagined it was. It's perhaps something bigger. They are this great bridge that links together different versions of Warhammer, and at no point has Games Workshop come along and said, you know what, your version is now invalid. They have edited it here and there. They have made small changes, but broadly speaking, the books stand. The characters stand. And no matter what version of Warhammer you love, Gotrek and Felix is there for you. So my conclusion would be, if you haven't read the books, and we haven't spoiled them too much, let's be really blunt, we barely went into them.
There's so much we didn't even
we barely went into them. If you haven't read the books, I cannot express enough just how cool they are, and hopefully how cool you will find them. Even if you're a 1st edition Warhammer fan, even if you're an 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle fan, you're going to find something extraordinary in there that will just make you laugh. It will make you cry, and it will make you say, fucking hell, why didn't I read these books earlier? So yes, for me, they are almost the quintessential Warhammer books.
Yep, they're also the best crack hit books in that your first hit is free. If you ever have a friend that you're trying to get into Warhammer, or someone that's kind of interested in it, literally just giving them their first Gotrek and Felix book is the perfect way to start. They're also like great for teenagers if you have kids that you want to introduce to Warhammer. Not like little kids, but like, like 12 plus. Like I started reading them when I was 10 or 11. Fucking loved them. Because hilariously, they're actually pretty chill on the swearing. And they're very good at like fade to black.
Like me.
Fuck. Well, this is a show for adults. Yeah. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching. And of course, the most important thing that is worth noting real quick about Gotrek and Felix is that if Gotrek and Felix wanted to communicate anything to y'all, is that they adjust and adapt as new things come out, and they are part of those new things, which goes to show that Gotrek and Felix would be great fans of Dark Deeds.
Oh, you rock!
You didn't know I was going.
I didn't know you were going there. Go pre-order our game, please. We don't have as many pre-orders as we need to make this work as well as we'd like. So please, it will make an enormous difference if you do. And I will also say this Wednesday at ridiculous o'clock UK time, we are going to be doing a live reaction to every single frickin' Total War 3, maybe a few other videos too. trailer that there is. So if you'd like to join us, that is at Ridiculous O'Clock on... It's on my channels, isn't it? It's over on the LAWhammer channels. You'll probably, if you go check over on the LAWhammer just now, see a little tag over on YouTube saying, this is coming up very soon, because it's already up there. So you can go and set an alert for that if you wish to do so.
Yeah, it'll be a bunker stream. We're going to be doing a lot of trailers. We'll be doing some from like Warhammer 1 and 2 as well.
Yeah.
Etienne, thanks Ian, for the wonderful idea. I'm going to make a Gotrek fan who's a Slayer pirate in universe telling Chuck Norris style stories about Gotrek.
Oh, I love that.
That's really
good thing to end on. Love that.
So he's just going to fight. He's like, you know how Gotrek swims? He pushes the ocean behind him. All right. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you Wednesday night. And if not, next Sunday.
All right. Bye-bye.